Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Lakewood City Council joint study session with the Lakewood Planning Commission on March 19th, 2018 at 7 p.m. in chambers. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul.
Here.
Johnson.
Present.
Vincent.
Here.
Beta.
Present.
Franks.
Here.
Gutwein.
Here.
LeBure.
Here.
Skilling.
Here.
Harrison.
Here.
Abel.
Here.
Roybal.
Here.
Planning Commission roll call. Hollander.
Here.
Bartlett.
Here.
Cone.
Here.
Edie.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Sinks. Sukowski.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody who has come out this evening. And before I start, I just want to take a moment to send our best wishes to the Ottoby family. If you might have remembered Bob Ottoby, who's kind of one of our resident historians that writes a lot of these fun books, passed away over the weekend suddenly. So definitely want to keep the Ottobys in our thoughts and prayers. I think Councilor Abel, you used to work with him at the Rocky Mountain News.
Yeah, he was a newsroom clerk.
Yeah.
I hired him right out of college, and wow.
Yep.
It's difficult.
Yep. Sorry to put you on the spot, but it is difficult. He is a good man.
He was, and our best to his family.
Yep, and his wife Kristen and the rest of his family. So, and then I'm going to turn it over real quick because I cut off our city manager abruptly at the end of last meeting, and she actually had a report, and we skipped her. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Paul. A couple of weeks ago, I was just going to announce that I had the good fortune of signing the closing papers for the Taylor property. So we're looking for funding to reimburse our investment, but it is now 60 acres, almost 60 acres, as a part of the City of Lakewood parkland. So I'm really happy about that, and I wanted to let you know.
Great. Thank you very much. That is fantastic. And so just for everybody's information, so we have 3 presentations. We'll have public comment after all those. This public comment is different than a regular city council meeting where there's open comment. This pertains strictly to the information presented and allows you to participate in the conversation like we would. So it would be limited to questions about what the presentations have been brought forth for tonight. And with that, I will turn item 3 over to Ms. Franks.
Item 3 is the Union Corridor.
Oh, sorry, we jumped it. If you don't mind, though, can we just jump into that? Does council mind if we do that first? Because I think it's going to be quick, so go ahead. The council policies and procedures, yeah.
Thanks, Mayor Paul. Appreciate you putting this towards the front. I do think it'll be quick. I did want to just kind of talk through to the public about the council policies and procedures, and wanted to first recognize Nanette Nealon for all the hard work from the staff perspective that she put forth to get this to the point it's at. A little bit of the background information is that the policies and procedures has been in place for a very long time, and when I joined council, that was probably December of 2015, raised the point that I thought it needed to go through a revision process again, along with a couple other counselors. And so wanted to just kind of give folks some background information on that. We went through a very extensive kind of council review and redlining process where we reviewed it and we looked to wherever we could build consensus. And that was through our facilitator, Jody Erickson with JSE and Associates. And we always looked for consensus, but weren't able to always get that. So then we went to majority rule, and then we set up a drafting committee. And that was myself as chair, Mayor Paul, and Councilor Abel, who were on the drafting committee. And so our job was to take all of that discussion and all of those decision points and turn that into revised language that then went back before the council. So this has been a very extensive process that we've gone through. We also kind of started the engagement really in earnest. That would be around February of 2017. And we really had some goals to do a few different things. And Nanette Nealon has put together some great information. I want to just go through a few things. One of the purpose of the council manual is to extend on but not conflict with the charter, to add additional detail and steps for the charter and the ordinance policy, and to be a guidance to kind of better understand the larger picture. We look to clarify language. We wanted to always be in compliance with the charter. Another one was to really remove some of that training language that maybe got in there over the years, and to remove out any editorialized comment. It was also important for us to make sure that we protected the citizens' right to speak at meetings, and I'm sure, as most of you know, we've actually expanded those opportunities to study sessions, and so those are some good things that have come out of that. It's important to note that tonight we're just kind of introducing this. The packet contains the full policies and procedures manual for your review. It can be found at lakewood.org/council policy manual. And what's great about that is you'll find that there are all the videos for 7 of the meetings where you can watch that dialogue happening. We felt that was really important for transparency. You'll also see on that same page a whole list of the former ordinances all the way back, I believe, to the 70s, all the way through the 2009-10. So that lets you see kind of that historical perspective on the manual. And I think we have put in a ton of great work on this. I think we've made it easier to read, easier to follow, but we certainly welcome the public's feedback on this as we move into the next meeting, where it'll be up for its vote. And Mayor Paul and Councilor Abel, is there anything you wanted to add to the discussion?
Mr. Abel?
It was a lengthy process. I believe the funding for it was 4 years ago and put into the city attorney's budget, where it sat for a couple of years. Just before I was elected, and our Councilwoman Vincent was elected 2 years ago, former mayor told the reporter at the Sentinel that it would be done before the new council took office. So 2 years later, with the haste that government moves, here we are.
So, and I would just echo, thank you to Ms. Franks. She really put in a lot of time and effort, as well as Ms. Nealon. At one point, for those folks that watch this, there was a debate of whether we should go word for word at the dais, and I think that the way that we were able to do this actually helped us get through the tough things that we needed. Now, there is an addendum to this, and it has to do with I'm going to say it wrong, Mr. Skilling, workplace harassment policy. And we had quite an antiquated policy, and so that was actually removed. We have received some new language that will then be subjected to a amended version, whether council adopts that with the full policies and procedures or not, but just so the community knows, that'll be part of that. And it's a meaningful part for the group as we looked at dealing with those types of issues, unfortunately. So with that, is there any other comments or questions from council? Mr. Beda.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I would like to thank my co-councilors and the mayor for all their hard work on this. I know it's taken a lot of time and effort, and I know how much work it is to try and wordsmith a document like this, having had to do things like this myself at times. So I want to just express my appreciation. I also want to make a point I think is really important, that this is just what it is, a procedural manual. It doesn't address substantive issues that we might have to deal with. as we move forward. It's just a way of approaching those substantive issues. And as an example, we're talking about the harassment. That's a substantive issue, and we're going to bring that back in at some point, and that's the way it should be. We don't want to hold this up for something that complicated, that difficult. Likewise, we have other issues, substantive issues that are still outstanding, and one of them we've talked about a couple of times is the matter of how the city attorney is reviewed and hired and so forth and so on. And I want to make it clear that by adopting what we have, or that what we will adopt, in no way forecloses further discussions in that regard going forward. And I'm hoping that we can do that in the next couple of months and get that issue addressed and resolved.
Certainly. And that has been not scheduled, but we have a couple months. I think the goal is to have it by May. So that is in motion as we speak. Yep. Ms. Gutwein.
Also, just want to take a moment to thank everyone for their hard work, and especially the drafting committee. I know several people have already said this, but it really was above and beyond the call of duty and a lot of extra time and hours. So really appreciate everyone, and Nanette as well, for the many hours. Thank you for your efforts. We appreciate it. And also thank you, and I'm hopeful that we can get this passed as an addendum, the harassment policy. So want to thank everyone for that as well. Thank you.
Ms. Franks.
And I just wanted to close by thanking the citizens who reached out, who either attended our meetings or who watched the videos and sent me emails or texts or phone calls about additions and suggestions. Without you, I don't think we would have achieved the level of quality. So really appreciate that, and want to continue to encourage folks to reach out to all of us or some of us, but however you want to reach out. But make sure that if you've got great ideas, that they get documented inside these types of documents. It's important that we include the community. And so for those who did come and sit with us on those sometimes long nights while we were doing that, we really do appreciate your time.
Great. Mr. Skilling.
Mayor, are we discussing the new addendum tonight, or are we not discussing this tonight?
So you certainly, I'm not sure if all the council had a chance because we got that today, but it's certainly open if you'd like to discuss that.
I don't want to discuss it until everyone's had time to review it, because it'll be like talking to myself, which is fun, but I don't think that would be productive, so I will wait.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, so going forward, the community, just to be aware, we will have this as a resolution adoption next week. That'll give council a week to look at the memo that we received, and we can have a conversation about that at that time or going forward. So is there any public input for policies and procedures? Nobody has signed up. All right, so we will now move on to the Union Corridor Transportation Plan, and I'll bring down Mr. Hutchison. Good evening.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, City Council, and welcome to all the others participating this evening, particularly Planning Commission, who is not here always for City Council study session, but I'm thrilled that they are for this part of the discussion and a later item, of course. I'm here to introduce a discussion that Mr. Dave Baskett will present, and it has to do with the Union Corridor, primarily the Union Corridor between Alameda Avenue and 6th Avenue, although the study area was much larger than that because the transportation system is such that impacts come from many places when you look at a transportation system. The community has been working toward what is now the Union Area Transportation Study for months, and we have a fair amount of information to present tonight. Of note will be a number of proposed projects that will be discussed by Mr. Baskett as he makes his presentation. So again, thank you for the time, and I'll introduce Mr. Baskett.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Baskett. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Get started here. Thank you. So I guess the first question is, why were we doing this study? And in the last 10 years, as we recovered from the 2008-2009 recession, we've had a lot of activity in the corridor. St. Anthony's Hospital opened, the W Line light rail opened, 3 medical office buildings have been built, apartment complexes with over 600 apartment units. The area became much more diverse, adding many fast casual dining options. We built a hotel. There's another hotel under construction right now. And all of this has led to more congestion. Now, first, I'd like to promise you I'm not going to sit here and read you slides. So you'll have to do some reading on your own. All right. The focus area extends roughly from 6th Avenue to Alameda and Van Gordon to the Federal Center. And then the impact area is about a half mile beyond the focus area in each direction. One of the things that I thought was really critical to do is get outreach and engagement methods in place that would be able to reach so many people, because there are just so many different users in the group, in the corridor, that you need to approach things now in many different ways to be able to give people the options to look. And here I'm clicking them up as some of the things that we've used with the digital and print, contacting HOAs, flyers and surveys, and open-ended online comments. But then we also wanted to go and meet with people in person. The open house we had on the deck of the old Chicago. You could actually look out and see up and down the corridor. Held it at rush hour so you could see it at its worst. We also had pop-ups at the light rail and Jason's Deli. We had individual meetings with business owners and property managers. We had the bigger normal type of public meetings. We met with special interest groups. And by the time we were done, we had outreach that to date, when this was prepared last fall, of 86,739 people that we had contacted through social media, mail, electronic media. And then we had face-to-face engagement with over 643 people. This is what we gathered, some of the information about who it was we were talking to and asking for their input on what they thought the pluses and minuses were of the corridor. Some surprising things: 12% of the employees travel over 50 miles to get to work. I do 30. I thought that was a long way. On the right-hand side, you see that we have 16,300 people that come into the corridor and 6,000 plus leave. There's only 380 employees lived within the focus area when we began. Since then, the Beacon Apartments have opened, and another apartment building is in the planning stage. There's also 2,000 people that just use the corridor to get through to their employment, either to the north or south. So, what are the key takeaways? Safety concerns of pedestrians and bikers may be encouraging users to choose to drive for walkable and bikeable trips. Intersections are a critical point of conflict, and many are currently perceived as unsafe for all users. Vibrant businesses and activity in the area is highly valued, and people appreciate the many commercial establishments along the corridor. Vehicle congestion concerns are corridor-wide, but are most concentrated at the gateways to the study area, 6th and Union and Alameda and Union. To determine the amount of development that should be assumed, we looked at prior development that has occurred. The final amount of development assumed was based on past development and how much could physically occur based on the most land-intensive scenario for development, the auto mode scenario, which I'll discuss in a minute. This also corresponds to DRCOG projections. We're predicting a little bit less than the amount of increase that we've seen in the last 20 years to occur in the next 20 years, and a shift in the character. Now that there will be more residential units, that will lead to more retail and services coming. The whole comment that retail follows rooftops. Still have more hotels coming in, and there will be a shift probably to more and more office and medical office use. Hospitals never seem to stop growing. During the recession, total vehicle miles traveled, that's VMT, flattened as VMT per capita declined, and this occurred region-wide. However, we're now in a point where the sheer volume of people moving into the metro area has overwhelmed the decline in the VMT per capita, so that now we see total VMT increasing. In the Union Corridor, with the addition of the W line and more housing and traffic volumes, the traffic volumes were moderated more than the rest of the region. You can actually see in the northern part of the corridor, we've seen a decline of about 10% in the amount of traffic, whereas in the middle of the corridor was a 2% increase. That's over a 7-year period, and a 16% increase that occurred at the southern end of the corridor, where there's been a lot of development occurring. This is some more. Those were traffic counts that we took. Here is some information we got from DRCOG, and you can see it took a while to pull out of the recession. There was not much change in the early years. It took until about 2012 or 13 for the traffic volume start to pick up. There's a sharp spike in pedestrian activity around lunchtime, particularly in the south end of the corridor. You can see, I'm not here how it comes up at Second Place, Cedar Drive, and the Wendy's area. And if you've ever tried to eat at Wendy's there at lunch, it takes a while. This creates traffic congestion as the lights on Union stay red longer to get the pedestrians across the street as they're going back and forth. The signals have to be timed for elderly, handicapped people to be able to make it all the way across. So that means in many cases when there is not someone like that pushed the button, the lights are still going to be red for that extra 5 or 10 seconds, and everybody is stopped because there's no way to change the lights based on we don't have facial recognition or anything about who is pressing the button. So availability of alternative modes leads to increased activity in an area. Many times the presence of car share and bike share opportunities is based on the form and density of development. We took a look here at 3 different scenarios for the future development to occur. The auto mode is pretty much the way that historically the corridor had developed. The mixed mode is an in-between scenario that still relies a lot on the automobile but doesn't take the deep dive of really focusing on creating a destination and focuses on alternative modes, and they take precedence over the automobile. So we wanted to look at all three of these to see what the differences would be. So here's some forecast, and as you would expect, if you're going to develop around the automobile, you're going to have more auto traffic, and that means you're probably going to have less pedestrian traffic because things are going to continue to be more spread out, and so there will be less walking trips that take place. Then as you move up the ladder to mixed use, you get more less auto traffic, more pedestrians, bicycles, transit riders, and if you go all the way heavily into the alternate mode, then less vehicle trips still and like 6 times as many pedestrians. Now you would expect if you're going to have more cars on the road that it's not going to work as well. It's going to take longer to get through, and sure enough, that's what we show here, that travel times do continue to go down as you go from auto to mixed use to alternatives. Here's a different way of looking at it. Here's 5 different intersections that where we're talking about level of service at the intersection. And again, that's with more autos, as you would expect, you get a lower level of service. Except for this one right here, the alternative mode Union Cedar, and that is because we threw in this one to say, okay, if we're really going to be working for alternative modes first, we threw in a mid-block pedestrian signal. And one of the problems we have on Union with the signal spacing and the number of signals, if you add another one to make it easier for the pedestrians, it really does have a tendency to make it very, very difficult for the cars to achieve any type of progression, and so you get more delay. Okay, there are a number of different ways, considerations you can take into account when you're trying to develop projects and prioritize them. And what we did is we started out that we had, well, what's the impact on the network and the users? And we found out that people wanted us to give points for bikes, pedestrians, and autos. That's reflected from the citizen input. And they wanted things that improved things for everyone to score higher than something that was just focused on one mode or another. And they wanted to primarily concentrate on reducing congestion on Alameda and Union. You look at cost, low, medium, and high. Low, we said, is $500,000 or less. Medium cost is $500,000 to $3 million, and a high cost project would be over $3 million. We wanted to look at stakeholder support. That's what we had all the surveys for, the people filling things out so that we knew what the people thought, regardless of what the costs were or the impacts to the system. What did they think about it? And then another thing that you can use to prioritize projects is the readiness of the project. Do we have right-of-way? Is there funding available? Is it partially designed? Things of that nature so that you could move more quickly. And then what is the relationship with the comprehensive plan? So now I'd like to go in and discuss some of the projects that we evaluated that rose to the top. The first is to do 2 lanes onto eastbound 6th Avenue. And that would modify the right turns at the signal to allow 2 lanes to enter. And part of what that does is right now, I take it the laser pointer doesn't show up on your screens. Sorry about that. Well, there's a double left turn here. And in order to get through the signal, both turn lanes fill up. But if people are in the inside turn lane and they want to go left, and as soon as they turn, they immediately have to try and merge with other traffic, and it generates a lot of conflict, and we get some sideswipe accidents, and that becomes a problem. Well, if you can have it so that 2 lanes can make the turn by altering the signals and making some minor modifications to that island, then we think that we can get some real benefit in terms of safety, and that it shouldn't cost too much money, and we should be able to work with CDOT. We've talked to them about this, and they say, yeah, we should take a look. We think that something could be done there. And this had the highest level of community support. The next is the Route Street extension, which is to extend Route Street over 6th Avenue with sidewalks and bike lanes to connect to Quail on the north side. This would provide an alternate route over US 6, and it'd be a safer route for everybody involved and reduce congestion on Union. It's a high-cost project, and so what we would suggest is that it's also a bigger project, and if you've ever worked with a federal aid highway, you have to do environmental. This stuff takes a long time, so you could get started on the project by talking to the CDOT personnel and environmental and seeing what level they would make us go through. This also had the highest level of community support. This is one that people did not really understand, I don't think, as well. So I went and took another example here. Parallel grade separations of freeways near interchanges are becoming a common reliever technique. This is I-25 and University, and you can see just a few blocks away is Steel Street, a collector street that goes over the highway, and it removes a few thousand cars a day from the interchange. And by doing that, you can really make a major impact on the interchange. The one on the right is US 36 at Federal Interchange, and a few blocks away you have Lowell that goes underneath it. And the idea is not to make this some major street. You really just need to take a few thousand vehicles a day out of that interchange mix to really improve the flow. We also have the Union Alameda. This was designed for high-speed auto movements using sweeping right turns and merge lane. Designing for pedestrians tightens up the turn lanes so that you actually deliberately try to slow the cars down some, and that would improve bike and pedestrian safety and comfort, make the connectivity work better. And it's low cost, and we think that we can fund this out of the existing transportation budget. We've already gone in, improved the signage, improved the striping of the crosswalks, cleared out some of the brush that was inhibiting visibility, and we're keeping track to see how people like that. There are steps that you can go beyond that. I'm sure a lot of you have gone across the raised crosswalk at these free right turns. That would be something that we could try, going all the way to even having signalized for the pedestrians, because it would be a very short signal that you only need to cross, maybe stop a car for 15 seconds to make that happen. But we like to start with the least invasive as we can, and then see how it works before we jump into something bigger. And it has a high level of community support. These get to be a little bit more difficult to explain, but first of all, a lot of people don't know what Siri Lane is. It's a private road that goes from Union back to the back of where these buildings are at. Right now, there's a hotel that's under construction right here. The idea is to make a connection that would go from the hotel site around here And as redevelopment occurred around this way, some of it you can see has already been done, the street, and basically this work would be done as the area redevelops, and by doing that you get a connection from Cedar up to Siri Lane that provides a different way for people to be able to get in and out. And this is an old picture, but the 3 medical office buildings, one's up here, here, and here, and it's being designed so that you can see this curb cut that would eventually connect to Cedar, so that you can have most of this work gets done as part of development. And we'd again, it improves mobility for all modes and reduces congestion by providing more ways to get around, so we're not forcing everybody to use just a couple of major intersections off of Union and Union itself. So, and it has a high level of community support. This one is to extend Siri Lane from Union to Healing Way with sidewalks and bike lanes. This is mostly being done right now by the hotel, where they'll be extending it up to the drainage ditch. And what will need to be done in the future, that could be something that the city gets involved in, is a bridge over the ditch. And that could be just for pedestrians and bikes, or it could be to connect autos to the street as well, to get better ways to get through. This is a medium cost, we're saying, because of the fact of having to do a bridge and some connections to it. And it has pretty high level of community support. The community support, by the way, is based on 1 to 10. So then the next thing that came up a lot was the idea of connections between the buildings along Union to the street and between the buildings. And that would be to add new sidewalk and repair existing sidewalks like you can see here. One of the things that we're looking at is a Transportation Management Association. That's the TMA. It's a private nonprofit made up of local governments and private sector to implement transportation demand management programs and projects. They apply for grants from various sources. A particular focus is usually on improving first and last mile accessibility to transit uses and areas of high demand for pedestrians and bikes that reduce auto trips. And right now, the city is involved with Denver and the housing authorities and has a grant application into DRCOG. We were hoping that we would know by now that the answer is yes, but we feel pretty good that the answer is going to be yes, and that this could be one of the types of projects that would be good for them to start out with. Here's another one of these improved connections through the parking lots. This is all private property here, and while it's possible to make it through the existing parking lots now, as redevelopment occurs, this could be strengthened for all users by making it more like a street rather than a parking drive aisle. And if we could get sidewalks and we could get room for pedestrians. This area here is where the Beacon Apartments are at, and we have in right now in this area development proposals to put in another apartment building. So we're looking at the idea that you could create something a lot like Siri Lane on the other side of the street. And again, it would be low cost because it would be done with redevelopment. And it has a fair level of community support. this this was also confusing to people. We got comments like, well, how many people want to go from the VA to Wendy's? It's like, that's not really what it would be for. The Second Place intersection, it's one of our highest use pedestrian intersections in the corridor and our highest use bus intersection. There are numerous challenges and trade-offs here between cars, buses, and pedestrians, but there's a lot of things that we can look at in terms of modifying the geometry and our operations of the traffic signals so that, you know, there's things, for example, that you can use what's called a leading walk light, so that the light is red for everybody, but the walk light comes on for like 5 seconds to let the groups of people get out in the street before the light turns green and the cars try to run them over. You know, and that's because one of the things that happens is and we can start doing this too, is taking away the right on red, because people are, we have instance where they're looking to the left because that's where the traffic's going to be coming from. They see a break and they start to pull out, and there's pedestrians in the crosswalk that they haven't seen, and it's quite frightening if you're the pedestrian, and people have been bumped. So you can correct some of that by you know, a combination of factors with the signal, and it's just a perpetual balancing act that we think that we can do things to improve it, and it would be low cost and within our existing budget. And every time you get into something where it's a challenge between different user groups, you don't get a high level of support. You get right kind of in the middle, that it's like, is this going to be good for me or bad for me? It's sort of hard to tell. Access management is something that we do already as property develops. It's largely a safety and capacity thing, where instead of having the design feature on the right where you've got 5 driveways that pedestrians and bicyclists have to cross, and people have to worry about somebody's all of a sudden going to slow down to turn right and they rear end them, that if you reduce the number of those access points, you can really control that type of accident from occurring and just make it safer for everybody. Like I said, we're already doing this, and it looks like we need to do more education to explain why this is good, since it didn't even get up to halfway on community support. So this one is the Hawk signal to install a call button in the middle. I can tell you right now, if the signal is used properly, getting stuck in the middle wouldn't occur, but we can improve the safety for scofflaws who are not using the signal properly by giving them a button in the middle, so that if they have started, crossed against the red light, and then suddenly the traffic is flowing all around them, and it's like, oh my God, well, there's nobody there to push the button. So we can do that within our existing budget this year. Has some mixed support. Okay, so what we're asking for is a consensus to bring a resolution forward adopting the Union Area Transportation Plan. If that's done, then we would take the things I've mentioned before that we could do within our existing budget. We'd start on that. We get input from you about how we should proceed with the other projects I've mentioned, and that would be worked into the budget process for next year, and we could make a start to try to solve some of the problems here. So with that, are there any questions?
Yes, sir. I think there will be. So, I'm going to start with a couple. For as long as I've been on council, Alameda Indian has been a challenge, and it's an expensive challenge. Did anything come up about, I know in the past there'd been talk of even doing kind of a little flyover that kept people going west, or some things to change the actual whole course over there. Would that come up at all?
Not very much. We had, I would say there is a solid contingent, about 30% of the people that didn't want to spend money. You know, so that definitely a minority, but definitely enough of a group to consider. And that would be really, really expensive. So we actually eliminated things like that were that expensive.
Do we have some sort of design work that shows what we would, if we had
We
all
did
the
some,
money in the world, what we would put there? And what I'm getting at is if we do have that, that should probably be incorporated potentially into this.
Okay. We've done some sketches to take a look at that, but we haven't really taken it beyond that.
Okay. And then it's interesting, you can see the increase as soon as the Alameda interchange opened. You saw the increase of usage tied back to the date on Alameda and Union. So you could see more folks utilizing the interchange and then coming down that way. What is a E intersection?
Okay, level of service. This is part of remember. A is like you're on a road. You can drive in any lane you want, any speed you want. B, you can pick your speed. You might have to switch lanes. C, you're mostly able to travel at the speed limit or close to it. D, you're starting to run into congestion. You might not get through a signal, for example, on the first cycle that you're there. By the time you get to level of service E, that's a pretty common thing, that you're not going to make it through on the first time that you get there. So it's just increasing delay, and then F, things have broken down to where you're actually carrying less traffic than you did with the lower levels of service, even though you have more vehicles that are trying to use it.
And then two other questions. The Cedar connection, did you examine actually taking Cedar down to Alameda rather than going to Route? And one of those, so one of the suggestions is that we would go to Route, but was it examined that we would take Alameda? Because that could take a lot of cars who are going to Union, could take them off the road a lot sooner than Alameda and Union, if that makes sense.
Yes, we have looked at that. I'm not sure if I can find the right slide to show you now, but the problem really is that there's a big drainage gulch there, and so it becomes very expensive to build the bridge across, and at that location it would be close enough to the Union Alameda intersection that it could only be a right in, right out. We wouldn't be able to make it a full movement, so pretty expensive for the benefit.
Okay, makes sense. And then TMA was examined. How about a bid? And I know that's been something that's been kicked around, and not so much. You're not going to get your heavy transportation issues solved, but with a bid or a business improvement district, you may get some of the pedestrian type features that would benefit the businesses along the corridor.
Yeah, we didn't look at a bid. We would leave that to economic development to get involved in. But with the interest in the TMA, and with the West Corridor being the only Fast Tracks corridor that does not have a TMA, that put us in a position working with Denver to be pretty sure that we were going to be able to get a grant to try and get it up and running. And that could very well lead to the next step that you're talking about, that as you get the businesses together and, working for a common good, then that could become a next step.
Cool. And then I'll just make one comment that this is scheduled to be adopted on, looks like April 9th.
Okay.
Accurate.
And you won't see me. I retire
I'm
Friday.
going to get to that.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Skilling.
Thank you, Mayor. So you had mentioned that this is, so maybe I'm confused, and thank you for the presentation, but so this is being called a plan. I thought it was a study that has all of the underlying data. It has a lot of different projects, lots of different ways to go. I'm unclear how this is a plan. I thought we were talking about a whole list of priorities, and from this, when we're making future decisions on projects, we could go back to this
Yes.
and look at things, everything you just described. So I wasn't planning on asking this, but now this is up on the slide. I'm curious what the plan is.
That's, you were correct in your description. That's what this is. And the first slide actually calls it a Union Area Transportation Study, which is really what it is. And so that's the way we'll bring back the resolution. Because it's not a plan. It was gathering input, it was getting all this different data, because what we were trying to figure out from the public and from the council, which direction you really want to go here. I mean, are we going to pick one way and say, no, we're going to make this a place. We're going to treat this more like a Belmar, as a destination, or what Westminster's doing up at Westminster City Center? Or are we going to continue to treat it as this is some place that we want to get traffic through? I mean, if people want to get to 6th Avenue and back, and so let's focus on that, because it's two entirely different things. And, we can do pretty well on any one of the priorities, but once you say, oh, no, we want it to work for everybody, well, that's a little more difficult.
And I promise I read it. So I just want to be clear that
Yes.
there isn't a plan buried in here that I wasn't aware of that we're adopting on April 9th. Because I looked at it exactly how you explained it is how I looked at it, is that if you want the auto-oriented, you got some of that in here. If you want the mixed, there's some of that too. Depending on which way you want to go, you've got the underlying data in here moving forward. Am I correct in that?
You are.
And there's not been any specific recommendations that we go towards auto or that you go towards the alternative. It's just that this gives you a framework to operate if you chose to go one of those two ways, correct?
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And in my reading, I noted that on page 23 and then in your slides here, your slide said the future development was 1,100 residential dwelling units. And then in 23, it had talked about future forecasts for development. Was there any thought about the development out in Rooney Valley and what the impacts of that would be on the Union Corridor? Because all those folks out there, to Mayor Paul's point, the timing of when the Alameda interchange opens, so you can imagine if they build out the valley, those folks got one way to go, pretty much. They're going to all come down Alameda, and then guess where they're going to go? They're going to go up Union. So has there been any thought to that when we're doing these forecasts?
Yes, it's all incorporated in the traffic modeling that's done. We pick up the DRCOG Regional Transportation Plan and the population employment by traffic zones, and that's all incorporated into the modeling that becomes the background for the traffic. And then we make adjustments to that based upon if we're going to be pushing towards an auto or an alternative mode that would have a tendency to modify the projections that they're making.
So you're saying that the projections did include
The Rooney Valley, yes. Yes.
Okay, and do you recall are they projecting that to come down Alameda, or what does that projection look like? Because I think that would go towards the auto versus the mix. I mean, the mix is fine, and the alternate would be a nice utopia, but if we've got that many cars, I mean, that would somewhat impact which way we go on prioritizing projects.
Yeah, that is included already in the forecast, and a lot of what's happening is that people are making changes, and it's getting harder and harder for us when you get these things like Waze and Google Maps and all this stuff, and you hit the button and it says, oh, today you're better off going to C470 and heading south and looping around, and the next day it says take Alameda to Union. And there are a lot of people that are doing that, and we're finding that happens, and a lot of people are coming out of the Rooney Valley, going west to get onto C470, and then north and looping around to 6th Avenue to stay out of the Union corridor.
Right. Okay. A couple other questions. What about the flashing yellows? Did you guys look at using flashing yellows at all on any of these turns? Because I'll give you an example. You come down Alameda and you turn on Union, and we travel this probably every day. So if you're coming down Alameda and you turn up on Union, you've got 2 turn lanes coming up north there. And if you're back far enough, you're missing that light every time. And forget about it in the wintertime. So has there been thought to extending that, putting in the flashing yellows there? Did you guys look at any of that?
We look at whether the flashing yellows are appropriate at every signal that we do that. And it's more and more difficult when you have multiple turn lanes. We don't use them nearly as often where we have more than one left turn lane, because it's too difficult for people to be able to see through the traffic that's queued across the street. So in places like that, we actually tend to use more of a protected only turn lane. And then the other thing with the higher speed streets like that, where it's really congested, we have a problem with people running red lights, and you can get into high speed collisions when, and that's some of the ones that generate the most injuries, and hopefully not fatalities, but that occurs too sometimes. So that one, I doubt that the flashing yellow would help, but yes, we go through and we check them all the time to see what's changed and would it be appropriate or not.
I noted one of the project lists was styled as the innovative intersection alternatives, and that was one of the intersections. So I didn't know what the alternative would be there, other than you'd mentioned putting in the signage on the high-speed turn lanes.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the things that we actually looked at is putting a pedestrian signal just to get people across the turn lane. And, this is getting a little bit deep, but you assume that a pedestrian walks 3.5 feet per second. We're only having them cross for maybe 5 seconds and then have a clearance interval for like 8 seconds, something like that. So you would be delaying the right turning vehicle for a very short period of time to allow the pedestrian to cross safely before they get to the traffic signal. Then there's the raised intersection so that they slow down because they got the bump, and that sometimes works and sometimes people just take the bump. If you're in a great big pickup, you don't even feel it. So yeah, they'll be looking at a lot of those things.
My last comment for you was that, and talking about the pedestrians, I note that I don't see a lot of pedestrians crossing there. I mean, I know that they're there. And I think to Mayor Paul's point too, the flyovers, it seems to me that I just don't see a lot of pedestrians crossing as much. It seemed to me that if you did flyovers at certain points and eliminated as many stops, you could get traffic just moving through Union, and they could pull over to whatever business they want to go to. But if you could just eliminate those dang lights going red, and the only purpose seems to be sometimes just for the peds, the flyover idea, I mean, I think that would get a lot of support from a lot of people if you just made that whole thing. Look, we know there's going to be cars. People aren't turning in their cars and getting on e-bikes, except maybe Barb, but nobody else is turning in their cars. So you're going to have all these cars are always, I mean, for the foreseeable future, Union needs to be a place where people can drive through and not be congested. Seems to me that flyover idea that we were just talking about would be one that, I know it might be expensive, but let's talk about it.
Okay.
I mean, what are we talking? I mean, how many millions of dollars is it? I don't know. Maybe we'll get funding from somewhere, but that would seem to be a solution that would actually make a big difference in how fast traffic moves through. That would be just my comment on that.
Okay.
Flying cars.
Yeah, not autonomous ones.
Ms. Franks.
For the record, the e-bike has been away for the winter, so I actually travel Union every day and wanted to talk about some of the actual experiential things and see how much they factored in. So basically, I go from kind of the Dunston and Divinity area along, and go up to Union. What I'm seeing along Union is everything from people trying to get to a set business and having to do all kinds of funky U-turns because there's no way to get in and out of the businesses. I'm seeing truck deliveries that are being delivered during rush hour and doing their backing up, and so traffic. So basically, supplies being delivered during rush hours. People turning in to get their caffeine in the morning and the lines going out. So I'm seeing that the fact that we don't have good setbacks, we don't have driveways wide enough for people to make a reasonable turn. So we get a lot of angst in the morning for folks in those situations, plus folks coming, that would be eastbound on Alameda, coming by the gas station and the Rite Aid, I think, in the gas station, and then immediately needing to get over onto Cedar, then having to cut through 3 lanes of traffic. So were all of those behavioral things looked at? Because I don't see anything that addresses any of those issues.
Well, yes, we did. We actually, from the consultant that we used, has offices in the 10-story building that you can look right down on the Cedar intersection, and we did observe that many times with the U-turns taking place to dive into the gas station. And
Are you raising my fist?
yeah. So, it is a problem. And then the Starbucks, we tried to get them as part of the development to make a connection with I forgot the burger place next to it, and it's private property. We couldn't force that to happen, and so now it's a very difficult situation where there's no flow through traffic and people get stuck backing up in a parking lot that's rather small for the volume that they have in the, like you're talking about, in the morning when everybody wants their caffeine. So we did look at a lot of that, but I'm not really sure in how you correct people's bad behavior.
Well, I think what I'm speaking to is I just don't think that we are planning holistically enough. When we do a site plan, we look very narrowly, and again, these parking lots were designed in ways in which they don't support those. So I think that we're exasperating it by not looking at larger, we kind of look at one thing individually. We're not looking at things holistically, and so we end up with this entire corridor, which is difficult to navigate both morning and night. You've got folks then coming southbound on Union who are trying to jockey to get past the people turning on Cedar and trying to do this horrible leapfrogging. And I've been in near accidents usually about 2-3 times a month. So I guess what I'm trying to impress on, that I understand that you have some limited, but when we don't do deep enough setbacks, when we put things too close and we can't expand, when we don't make driveways large enough, when we don't have parking, those things all over time, as each individual new development comes in, just keep exasperating the problems larger. So I'm not saying it's necessarily you. I'm kind of speaking to the broader thing here, where if we don't step back and start looking holistically and we just keep approving one project at a time, we are going to be like that poor frog in the pot, where it just gets 1 degree warmer until we're all absolutely miserable. And it's become a very difficult commute the last 5 years, I would just say. And I'm sensing that people in the community are getting to the point of frustration where we have folks who are considering leaving our lovely community because it's no longer something that they can tolerate. So I want us all to hear that, even though maybe it's not pleasant to hear.
Well, that's part of what the study was supposed to do, is to take a more holistic, view of there. And I can tell you, and one of the things that we looked at, it's in the study, is the parking. And there's actually, the parking is pretty good to excessive in a lot of places in the corridor, but there's a few places where there's specific problems. But like, for example, both of the apartment buildings always have lots of empty parking spaces in their structures. And that makes it, that's, by the way, another thing that TMAs have a tendency to work on, to see if they can prove that's the case, and over a long period of time, then can they help in negotiating shared parking arrangements that make things even better.
And my last question is, did you guys factor in how many cars you think that Route Street Bridge would take off of Union? I mean, is there an estimate of how many cars that we would expect would be able to utilize that, considering that there's a lot of traffic getting onto 6th Avenue? So unless you're planning a second on-ramp, if it's just an overpass, but how many cars do you think the Route Street extension would take off the streets?
Probably in the 5,000 to 7,000 range. You know.
Thank you. Ms. Harrison.
What a great presentation. I appreciate all the hard work that everybody did. A couple of questions that I had. As I was going through the study, I noticed a couple of talking about people who had mobility or disability challenges getting across the street.
Mm-hmm.
Was that because I know you had said earlier in the presentation that a lot of times lights had to be longer to allow people? I'm assuming that was kind of looked at all through the study area, correct?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And then one question or a suggestion, I'll just consider it a suggestion. Some cities are painting what they call the square a totally different color, and that seems to be able to bring more attention to the box in the middle of the intersection. I'm just throwing that out as maybe, I don't know if it helps or not.
We've looked at some of that. I know that on Colorado Boulevard, for example, CDOT tried red. Didn't last as long as they had hoped. We're using green on Garrison for the bike lanes and some of those. The difficulty with it is that it's very expensive to put down, and it doesn't last very long, so you have to continue to replace it. And there's some question about how effective it really is.
Sell advertising.
Yeah. We tried to do that once in parking
I'm
lots.
saying it would work.
Mr. Abel.
Thank you. Can't tell you how many times I've approached Cedar on Union from either the north or coming around from Alameda and see traffic where I'm heading, and I wish that was available for a relief. And it seems to me that a number of these proposals of extending streets and connecting various parking lots and such might provide those kind of escape routes from heavy traffic. If we were to do all of that, everything that's mentioned here, any idea what the total price would be?
Huh. No, I didn't add it up, but
Okay.
I'm guessing that would be somewhere probably in the $40 to $50 million over a period of 20 years, something like that.
That would include the Route Street Bridge and...
Yeah, we're thinking that the Route Street Bridge would probably come in somewhere in the $12 to $15 million, and that's the most expensive project that we had considered. Now, if we go back to Alameda and Union with the flyover there, that would be probably at least as much. It's a very difficult place at the Union and Alameda because of the big drainage that we have coming right through the intersection underneath it, and it just, that ups the cost.
Well, my question was kind of confined to your wish list, not Mayor's
Not
and
the mayor's.
Councilman Skilling's.
Okay.
The idea of routing streets through parking lots or through what now are parking lots, I assume that would require some takings of property.
Well, we weren't really looking at that. We were talking about maybe getting easements, trying to do it as part of the redevelopment. We weren't talking about making them really public streets. We had some pushback from the property owners about that. They like to keep everything they've got. That's part of the inheritance, I guess, if you will, from the development that took place, because Union was developed in the era of the super blocks, where they're huge chunks of land, and that you'd have flexibility to make changes in the future. But as a result, the connectivity, I mean, it's just one parking lot butting up against another, and there's no clear way to get through. But again, part of the hope there is that it really does take something like a TMA or a BID, where you have people that can just work with that small group of businesses and get them to work together. And now we have instances, without naming the properties or anything, where we had been able to do cross-access agreements, and then they got in a fight and somebody puts a cable across it, you know, because they're squabbling about things. So the idea that we're looking at is that if you could get like an access easement of some kind so that it's really legal, but we're not taking the land. So
Stays
if you
on
want
the
to, we
deed,
could.
not in use. And that brings up the question of how many parking spaces would that remove from an area that, except for the larger apartment buildings you were talking about, Vanguard and Beacon, parking's at a premium over there. So
Yeah.
how many would we lose?
Not many, because you can already find a drive aisle going through, but it would take some because there's no walk. The people are just walking across the parking lot. And the main thing that we're talking about that's different is trying to make the drive aisle a little bit more direct, but then being able to put sidewalks on the side. So by doing that, probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 parking spaces.
That's not bad at all, but routing through traffic past all those parking places would seem to be a difficult thing if you're trying to back out of a parking spot. But
Yeah, it would have to be designed in such a way that you really wouldn't back out into that drive aisle. It would be just dedicated to getting through, which some of them are already. And then you'd have other drive aisles that would tee into them, and that's where people would be doing the backing out. And so it would just be for through traffic.
just between us, I already use those.
Second that.
Don't tell anyone. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Dave, I know a lot of work's gone into this, and thank you. In all honesty, it's taken hours for me to try and digest so much data and information. And on page 23 seems to be the most insightful, relevant, and honest statement in the entire document. And it speaks to the update to the rezoning code that was completed in 2012. And that it indicates that at that time, the city planned to change the character of this area into high-density, mixed-use form. It goes on to say, since the 2012 update, a significant amount of development has occurred, and an increase in bike and pedestrian traffic has also been realized. As a result, some in the city have expressed concerns that the current direction may be unsustainable in the future. And I would like to suggest, and I know that you mentioned at one point, that in there was a noticeable increase in traffic in 2012. For the last 4 years, during different election cycles, and even before that, the largest comment that I hear from people is concern about the way that we are growing and developing. And in fact, there was even an initiative that was brought forth by the people regarding growth and development. And I would just like to suggest that we, the city, have created this with the rezoning rewrite in 2012. And it seems very clear to me that one of the things that we could do to remediate this is to downsize that whole corridor regarding the intensity and the density that is being pushed onto it. Nowhere in the document does it talk about parks or open space. We are increasing density and pushing more and more in and doing a lot of infill, but not taking into consideration the way the people are going to live after they're there. And also, I do have a question or a comment. I went to several of your open houses and they were nice. Thank you. The first one, I believe, was at Old Chicago.
Right.
And one of the comments that I heard there was that after Beacon went up, the vacancy rate in the office building adjacent or just to the south of it increased because the folks in the building no longer had a very nice line of sight. Now they're looking at this huge apartment house. I believe you're shaking your head.
Yeah, well, I know the consultant that we hired was on the second floor, and they renegotiated their lease to go to the 10th floor.
So what we are doing is counterproductive in some ways for some of the office buildings as well. There's been a lot of interest, and I totally get it, to upgrade the route street from Alameda north to 6th Avenue. I haven't heard any mention about what that's going to do to the street north of 6th Avenue, if it can accommodate to what you were saying, 5,000 cars a day?
Yeah, well, a collector street is expected to be able to carry up to 12,000 vehicles per day. Right now, everything to the north, Quail, up to Colfax, is a industrial collector street. It serves our city shops and that type, the buses for the school district, for example, and it is designed to be able to accommodate those. Development around there has changed a lot. You know, it's gone from, it used to be that the furniture row type thing was much larger than it is now, and it's kind of downscaled, but it was designed, that area, to accommodate semi trucks to be able to come in and make deliveries. There's the recreational vehicle facility there, so it's the right type of street to take that type of use. No residential, for example.
So it can accommodate.
Yes.
Okay. Also in the document, and Councillor Skilling pointed it out, I think it's on page 23, about 1,100 new residential units that would be north of the transit station and south of the hospital and west of Union. It didn't mention the Denver Federal Center, and that's kind of the elephant that's on the middle of the table here.
Yeah, the data that we had, it was done before all of this came up about the homeless thing. So that part was pretty well wrapped in based on the zoning that we had in place and the plan that we had in place.
Well, and the document also speaks to increased density on Green Mountain. To me, it's very clear that we as a council have got to address the density that we are pushing in this corridor. And even though on the maps it shows that it's purple, it's targeted for increased density, we have created a monster. And please, my next comment and question is not designed to speak to anybody's integrity of this document, but there were 374 participants. Do we know if the people that participated all lived in Lakewood? Number one. And our population is what, about 155,000?
Right.
We're going to be growing in density. What we do on this corridor is going to have very long-term impact 50 years from now. And I don't want my legacy to be that I created more problems for the city and the people that already live here. Please talk to me about the survey itself. There's 374 participants. How statistically significant is that? And was there any talk to do a random survey? Sometimes these people self-select. And the reason I'm saying that is when I went to the meetings, the biking lobby is very strong and active in these types of things. They don't all live in the area where the people who already live there are being impacted by. And just as a side comment, this document is awesome. It kept me entertained for many hours over the weekend. But it targets, it speaks frequently, maybe 20 to 25 times, regarding biking and pedestrians. And it actually also talks about, in some ways, the difficulty that we are creating for autos. I'm having a hard time with that. Beacon Hill, and on page 9 of this, it's talking about one of the apartment houses that during the day, the vacancy rate in the parking lot is what the document feels is high. That's assuming everybody has one car. Maybe some of the people in these apartment houses have 2 cars. And it's talking about repurposing some of the different land for other things when the parking isn't being used. I'm digressing. Please talk to me about the relevancy, and I'm not trying to demean anybody's integrity on this, but I think it's a fair question to ask if it was randomized and if it's really statistically significant with 376 participants.
Okay. Well, let me see how much of this I can get back and address. We didn't just take the survey. That's why we had all the other outreach, having people show them the video. We did not try to limit it to people who live in Lakewood, because this is one of our major employment area, the place for our major economic growth. And we know, like I said, 12% of the employees drive in from over 50 miles away, but they've got a stake in this, as well. So we talked to all the users, and people did self-select. And what we tried to do is contact as many people in as many different ways as we could, from the social media to direct mail to, we even had for a week before the meetings, the big meetings, we had variable message signs on the corridor to attract people who were just driving by, to let them know that they could come in. In doing these studies, statistically significant, I don't know. I couldn't really tell you if it is or not. What I can tell you, it is the most extensive outreach effort that has been done in this area. And there have been a number of prior studies, including the comprehensive plan for the Federal Center and the connectivity plan that was done a number of years ago for Union Corridor and some of the zoning things. Well, this was about as broad of outreach as we could get. And, that's why we have all the breakdown in there about, who did respond and what was the relationship to the corridor. For example, there's a table in there that talks about that. Are you an employee? Are you a resident? How long have you been here? Things of that nature. So you can look at that and get an idea. We didn't tell people that we could do this. We can't trace a person, but we can go in and identify if people were trying to cheat by finding the IP address that was used on the computer to fill out the survey. And we had one computer that was used to fill out 7 surveys, I think it was. So and that could have been from a library or something. We're not tracing where it came from, just if one computer was being used over and over again, like the bots that we hear about, and we know that wasn't the case. So I don't know, there were a lot of people who were interested, and boy, they had a lot of different opinions about what should be done. I can tell you that the conversation that you were talking about related to the density and how much development, that's certainly not unique to Lakewood. That's going on right now in Boulder. It was just in the Denver paper yesterday about out by the 5 Points area. Everybody is doing it because we've gotten so much. Within the past decade, the metro area has received about 1 million new people coming in, and that it's stressing all over. One of the things that I did, this is just on my own, I was out of curiosity, I went back for like 3 decades to look at the percent of population in Jefferson County that lived in Lakewood. And it's pretty consistent. It's right around 17% of the population in Jefferson County lives in Lakewood, and that's been a pretty consistent percentage over a number of years. So I don't know what to make of that. I'll just throw that out.
I actually appreciate your response that you did take into consideration all stakeholders.
Yeah.
However, that needs to be balanced with, for me, I personally feel strongly that a community is defined by the people that live here and that are actually paying the property taxes. And so many of the homes west of Union, we have created a problem for them. And it actually only makes sense. When Beacon went up, it's totally apartments. It's not mixed use. And people are going to want to go to Starbucks. So, of course, they're going to want to cross the street. But we, as a city, frankly, with our zoning and wanting to go high density, we have created a monster. And we can help to remediate that by redressing and taking another look at the high intensity, the high density that's being pushed on that corridor for not only the folks that live right close to the corridor, but for the folks north, and as Councilor Skilling was talking about, south, with any potential growth over there by Rooney Valley, Green Mountain, and of course the Denver Federal Center. Again, I'd like for us to take a look at having a document that speaks to what our culture is, and one of our biggest values in our city is open space. And if we infill on everything, there's no room for parks and open space, even pocket parks. So
That's not what this study.
Yeah, so this is a transportation study, so I think
understand
that
that,
the density
but,
issues are what we're dealing with in the development
no, I
dialogue.
understand that, but
So-
it needs to at least be put out there,
Ms. Gutwein?
part of the big picture.
All right. So thank you, first of all, and then just an incredible amount of data in this plan. anyone who is interested in reading it. It's amazing just how much information is in here. And one thing that really struck me is looking at the traffic counts over the years, and that some of them decreased, some stayed about the same, and then some intersections we saw an increase. I thought that was so interesting because I hear a lot of complaints about traffic, and I think we all, feel that. I'm wondering if, I think it's because traffic is just such a miserable experience that maybe that's what we're kind of focused on. But it was really interesting to me to be able to put that in perspective and see, okay, not all of it has gotten worse. Some of it's about the same, and some of it has become worse. And I think that it's really important that we prioritize this because it has become a pain point for our community. And like you mentioned, not just Lakewood, the whole Denver metro area has experienced a lot of growth. So my question, couple of them, one is, with the TMA, is there a council action required to moving forward with TMA? Could you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Not really. The people who've been doing that's city manager and Roger Wadnall, and I don't know that much about what the arrangements are. I just know that it's the 2 housing districts and the 2 cities.
Yes, thank you. It is a collaborative with Denver and Denver Housing Authority, so City and County of Denver, the Housing Authority of Denver, City of Lakewood, as well as Metro West Housing Solutions. And we are, as Dave indicated, we are looking for a grant from DRCOG to support a TMA in order to focus on last mile connections and funding thereof.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you. And then let's see, my other question is just about the 2 lanes onto eastbound 6 that had low cost and high impact. Is that something that, I guess, what is the approximate cost of that? I'm not sure if you...
Well, low cost, we think it'd be less than $500,000.
I would like to see us prioritize that. I think that, I think the community would feel good about making improvements here and investing in that. And I realize you said 30% of our community would like to spend no money, but that's 70% that would like to see us make investments here. So I hope we can prioritize that. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, we've talked a little bit about these different scenarios. We have the auto scenario, the mixed scenario, and the alternative. And there's a page on page 34 that kind of breaks down what these different scenarios look like. And part of being a mixed use scenario is having the higher story buildings. Is that
Yes.
a fair assessment to say that if we want to be a mixed use community, then that comes with higher densities and higher buildings?
Yes.
So the reason I'm asking that is I think this is something that I think our community gets a lot of confusion around, is that, and the other thing, when we looked at the data, the traffic actually gets worse in the auto only scenario. So
That's right, because you need your car to get everywhere.
right. So if we do only cars with lower densities, we will have more traffic. But if we have higher buildings where people can live where they work and they can, take alternative modes of transportation, we'll actually have lower traffic. So I think that's just something that gets a lot of confusion and misconceptions about. And I think just one final comment is that, we had DRCOG come out a couple weeks ago at our ward meeting, and I think it's really important that we're all aware that the growth is not anticipated to stop. And whether or not, whatever we do with our zoning code, growth is anticipated to come to the Denver metro area, and we should be planning for it. And while there's frustration and angst around higher buildings, ultimately it does lead to lower traffic. So thank you.
Well, thank you, sir.
Sure.
And on a different note, thank you for your service to our community. I know you're riding off into the sunset to do some great things, but if the community doesn't know what kind of asset Mr. Baskett has been, we were able to secure a lot of money and dollars for a lot of projects, especially surrounding the light rail. And you have great expertise in understanding those crazy formulas and finding a way for the city of Lakewood to get dollars. So thank you so much for all your hard work, your dedication, for commuting every day back and forth.
Yeah.
And is your wife going to continue to work, or is she going to join you?
No, she's looking for at least 5 more years.
Okay. And she's in Westminster kind of doing the same thing, right?
Right.
All right. So thank you, Dave.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Hollander?
Well, this was a joint study session, so I thought we'd have an opportunity to ask some questions.
Well, if you'd like to, certainly.
Having spent most of my career dealing with such issues, I wish I had time to review the whole thing. Then we'd be here all night to answer questions. But one thing that I noticed, and I'm surprised, I used to work for Michael Baker. Surprised it didn't come up, or maybe it did and it was discounted because of the cost. But we have talked about high cost items, and maybe this falls in the same category with the improvement at the intersection. If we do proceed with the concept of mixed use and having this a mixed use area, and at least go the middle route to have some consideration of making this a mixed use area. One of the biggest impediments is getting from one side to the other of Union. Was there any consideration of some way to do that through there's a lot of ways to do it. The most common way is a bridge or a tunnel, but there are other alternatives. Some of them are pretty far out there, but was that ever considered? In some cities they do walkways between buildings that maybe, and some of this might seem pie in the sky, but if we get a benefactor that throws some money, we ought to at least have a plan that addresses one of the most important things, I think, to the corridor is the
Yes, it was considered. It boiled down to looking at one location in particular, the Siri Way, to put in another hawk signal there. It's really interesting that it's one of those, the hawk signal comes out, it has supporters that thinks it's the greatest thing in the world, and then there's another group of people, somewhat smaller, but they think it's the stupidest thing they've ever seen in their lives.
Yeah, but
so but it's but there's also, it doesn't have to be a hawk. There are a lot of other types of just a straight pedestrian signal, or a pedestrian signal that only gets you across one set of lanes at a time.
What I'm talking about is something that doesn't impede traffic. It would actually help the through traffic too, to get people to the other side. I don't know, a tram system. Think outside the box. That should have at least been in the study, I would think, somewhere.
Well, there was some discussion about things like that really it comes down to a lot the autonomous vehicles and the ride-hailing services and the things that they're trying to do that are, like, I know there's a big setback today that occurred in doing this, but Uber and Lyft are both see as part of their future that they would be able to put most of the bus companies out of business. As soon as they can get to autonomous vehicles, that they could set it up, that they could deliver much quicker, and that they would be able to do things like this. And we're not there now to make it feasible.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Vincent, you had.
I thought what I understood you to say is we were almost talking like think Minneapolis, where they have the bridges that connect one side of the street to the other side of the street. Is that?
Yeah, that could be, developers could pay for something. It might be too late because the development maybe already occurred.
Already occurred. So
but
I think did you look at that?
Not really, but that partly gets into the type of things that we're looking for some direction from council, like we had done, for example, with Belmar. It was planned initially that there was going to be a hotel at the corner of that was going to be the big anchor, and that if we could get another building on the other side, that we could have a second or third level connection like they do in downtown Denver from, I forgot the name of the hotel now, but the Sheridan, where they have something across, and that didn't work out. And if some of the scenarios that we were looking at, if you were to have the big buildings brought up close to the street and you got a couple of them right across the street from each other, you could look at something like that. But we were basically looking at things that that we could get some money for to build. And a lot of this stuff is like the problem with the overpasses is that with the ADA requirements, if you put in ramps, then you're making people walk 3 times as far to get up and then over and then down again. And you can only have so many of them, and they just jaywalk. I mean, it's that much simpler.
What about the undergrounding, though, like they've done in Boulder with the culverts and?
Yeah, that's we've looked and started to do some of that. We did it on Wadsworth, and we did it 2 places on Wadsworth, just down the hill here and north of 6th Avenue. We don't have any projects like that underway here to do that right now, and they have it's somewhat lesser of a problem in terms of the grades. But what you run into with trying to do the tunnels on the big corridors like Union there's so many utilities, and they're big utilities because you have all that density that's in there that it's hard to miss them all without going really, really deep, and so the cost starts to get out of hand pretty quickly.
Mr. Hollander or anybody else on the planning commission?
The only other comment I have is in defense of the traffic department and the consultant. The purpose of a transportation study is not to deal with, make development type decisions. But they have to account for the existing planning that we have, and that's what was done here.
Mr. Skilling?
So I was thinking of Bowles and Wadsworth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the switchbacks you're talking about, right? That's
Yes.
a massive undertaking. So if
Right.
we want to know the cost, we could ask our friends in Littleton what that cost.
Or county commission?
Jefferson County.
Or county commissioners, whoever. Oh, that's right, it'd be county commissioners. Ask somebody what that costs. So that's what you're talking about, right? The switchbacks, because that's ADA.
Yes.
Okay.
The-
And then one other comment that I forgot to mention was, solving the problem of Union, the traffic. We mentioned it a couple times anecdotally. Cedar and then the right turn onto Alameda, the game of Frogger that everybody's playing. That is the number one. So when people complain about traffic on Union, I bet you that's what they're talking about. So if you had a dedicated turn lane making a right, and I understand King Soopers wouldn't like it because that's the issue. You can't have a dedicated because then nobody can get over to go into King Soopers. But if you had a dedicated all the time, everyone can make a right. That would solve that problem. I don't know how to do that. It's above my pay grade, but that would solve a major problem on Union. We talk about traffic. That's the big one. And I only know that because I drive it every day.
It is. I understand. I've been caught up in it myself and watched it and studied it, and yeah, it's.
Ms. Johnson?
Just one last comment. You have a design here that shows how many people come into the area. It's 16,300 basically. 6,000 are leaving it, and only 380 are actually staying that live and work in the area. So even though we've created a lot of high density, folks aren't staying there to work. So
Well, no, that was the one apartment building that was on Van Gordon. That's all that was included there, and it wasn't totally occupied. So, and we do know is that at least 40 of the people who live there work at the VA and walk over there every day. So, and now there's another one, the Beacon is open and starting to lease out. There will be more.
that number will increase then.
Yes.
Okay, so is there consensus from council to move this forward to our next phase? Yes. All right. Could council give some direction as to just maybe some more background on Alameda and Union? Would that be helpful to see what plans in the past we have had, so council can kind of have an idea of what that looks like?
Okay.
Is that something that we could get produced? Is that okay with council? Would you like to see that? Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. You know, and I think what it comes down to is we need to look at, you know, this corridor as an asset. And does anybody remember 96 to 98 trying to turn right onto Alameda on Union before they widened it and gave it a dedicated? It was a mess. So what I'm saying is we've had these messes before, and we're going to work through them. And this is an opportunity for us to see a way forward. And of course, everything has a fiscal note attached to it. But also keep in mind when you look at, you know, pre-zoning update, prior whatever, look at a hospital that was put in with 2,500 new jobs. And that adds to it as well. And so when you look at areas of density, you know, what is that balance? And that's the future conversations we're going to have. But that's really, if you look around communities throughout the metro area, Union Boulevard is unique to the city of Lakewood. I can't think of any of our other sister cities in the county that have something like Union Boulevard, you know, and where you have kind of a secondary downtown, because Belmar gets mad if you don't call them the downtown. But, you know, I mean, and that's going to continue to change. So with that, I will open the public feedback on this presentation. And I have Ray, you'd like to speak? Good evening.
City Council, appreciate the opportunity to address this transportation study, and it seems to me that the current slide that's on the screen there that says they want a consensus to bring forward a resolution to the Union Area Transportation Plan. There were plans in this study, which is supposed to have been a study, and if the plans are adopted, it's going to exacerbate what I already see as an existing and ongoing problem in the city of Lakewood, and that's its growth. Lakewood at this point in time has exceeded its capacity to accept additional growth. I see this study as nothing more than a plan to continually grow the city to the point that we began to look and act like many of the cities in the east. If this plan is enabled, you can bet that 20 years down the road, there will be another need to conduct another study to do the very same thing. And I like to use a few analogies. One is if you were obese and you want to improve your prospects for a good, long, healthy life, do you make plans to buy bigger and bigger clothes to accommodate the future increase in your obesity? Or do you establish a diet to lose weight or maintain yourself at a present weight? Why is it that we are always looking to increase business and population in an area that at one time based its charm on being quiet and laid back? Instead of planning for additional growth, why not plan for a reduction in population density? That'd solve a lot of problems. When you place more and more people in a city without allowing for personal space, you are creating a recipe for disaster. Just look at all the problems the major population centers back east, and for that matter, any large city in the world are experiencing as a result of their growth. Growth is kind of like a bag of rocks. You can stuff only so many in the bag. If you try to exceed that bag's capacity, you will destroy the bag. It is my opinion that we should be looking to control growth, if not eliminate it, and concentrate on improving the existing infrastructure and community services. And I have just one last question to leave with all of you. Just who is it that says that we as a community are obligated to provide low-cost housing to people who don't even live here at this point?
Could you keep this to the transportation, please?
That's
Thank
a
you.
part of this transportation thing. That's the growth issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Peters?
Mayor, Council, thank you for the opportunity to comment on the study. I'm an engineer, and so I know how important it is to get the input correctly for any type of study so that you can make the proper conclusions and have the proper output. And I do have concerns about this study, and I think that there are some factors that were not considered in the input that could potentially dramatically affect the output. So the first of which, I know it was mentioned earlier that the CCH proposal was not included because that came in too late. However, there have been previous plans for development, residential development, mixed use in that area. I think it's important that that is looked at, maybe even as a sensitivity. But even more important than that, there was a question asked about the development in Rooney Valley. And that, I don't believe, could have been taken fully into consideration in this plan, because the data that was input into it was from I believe, the 2040 Metro Vision Regional Transportation Plan from DRCOG. That plan was adopted on April 19th, 2017, and it used land use demographic info from the urban sim model. And in looking at the information, and I think others who are more familiar with this would be able to comment on it, but it looks like that data, it used actual data up to 2015 and then estimated data from 2015 to 2040. And back in 2015, the Rooney Valley plan was to have commercial. You guys might remember, I think a lot of us were here as the Rooney Valley master plan was updated from heavily being commercial to heavy on the residential side. And so I don't think that was incorporated, but if it was, even if it was, which I really doubt it was, but if it was, I think it would have such a significant effect on that estimated 16,000 trips coming into the area that it should be spelled out specifically how many trips are coming in from that development. I think what we're going to end up having is looking at the middle ground, the mixed use, where we do a lot of heavy development, thinking people are going to walk and use that area, but then we also have a lot of car trips. So we really have the worst of both worlds. We have all these car trips coming in and that mixed use. So I think that's something important to look at. And I just wanted to also let folks know how imminent the potential Rooney Valley development with Morrison is going forward. They're looking at
We keep it to the transportation.
approving
section,
it.
please.
Yeah, I wanted to pass this out though because it is important. This is
Go
the
ahead and give it
timeline
to the
on
clerk, please. We just,
Sure, I'll do that, no problem. I wanted to also comment on the Siri to Cedar, Union to Healing Way. I know that there was a mention of some improvements on that by the hotel, by that development. I think it'd be valuable to see what part would be done by those improvements and what part would be done by the city. Similar with the Van Gordon to Union near Beacon and the other proposed apartments. Talking about that could be low cost with redevelopment, maybe a little bit more detail on that. And then the last thing, I just want to really support Mr. Hollander's comment on looking at ways to get folks from the other side. Appreciate that discussion. One thing maybe folks could think about is there's trolleys or underground as mentioned, but I think that's a really important need today and in the future. And I will pass this schedule out so folks can understand that this is a factor, it's coming up, and should be considered.
Thank you. Alex?
Good evening. Alex Plotkin, 1231 Southport Court. Thank you for having me. A city is a system, and right now this city is getting more and more out of balance when it comes to infrastructure, traffic, and general sustainability. It is commendable to see that a traffic study is being done for the Union Corridor. However, it is a bit concerning that the scope does not seem to sufficiently address the impeding impacts from the Rooney Valley proposed developments, as that whole side of the valley has no public transit to speak of. The larger problem is that Lakewood is a city that was built around a car. And while one could say that we could potentially turn Union into a mixed mode street, as was kind of suggested in some of the scenarios in the study, what about the lacking infrastructure in the rest of the city, if not the whole valley? Will people drive from, say, the southern edge of the Rooney Valley, then park at an underground garage somewhere, hop on the bike, and then proceed to ride in the rest of the city? What happens when it snows, and et cetera, et cetera? It is very expensive, but it is still not too late to really push for a comprehensive public transit network in the whole valley. So I urge you to direct a comprehensive citywide study while proceeding with some of the very good suggestions that were pointed out in the current study. However, there are a lot of points, even in the present study, highlighting how many opportunities to do better have already been missed. For example, some of the suggestions seem to imply that sections of the road need to have the outer lanes narrowed in order to make room for the bike lanes. This demonstrates the point of how zoning myopia has resulted in poorly laid out roadways we have to deal with now. So we ask you to initiate a more comprehensive study to drive more visionary planning and zoning practices for the whole city so that there are fewer design errors to correct in the future developments. Basically, treat some of the findings in this current study as lessons learned for what not to allow in the common developments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too, thank you. All right, anybody else? All right, we will move on to our next subject.
Good evening, Dave Wickman, Ward 4. As a former and now recovering politician, I can understand the need to spend some money, and if you're going to do it, I suppose this is as good as any. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is as what Alex and Ms. Peters and even Councilor Skilling mentioned, was when we started this, if you go back to the Nexus, a couple of years ago, we were looking at developments in the Rooney Valley, and the question that we asked on council was what would be the impact on the rest of the city. Specifically, we're asking Union Boulevard, how much more traffic could it take? We wanted a number. If we get 1,000 new houses in Rooney Valley, can 1,000 new cars go on Union? That was the question. So that was the point of the so-called study, but of course that's entirely lost right now. Those questions are still not answered. Now, when the question was asked as to what is going to be the long-term assumptions, it was, Rooney Valley was not included. You notice when they looked at the map, obviously was not included. And when it came to the matter of what is the overall impact, the answer we got was it was the Dr. Cog numbers. Well, the Dr. Cog numbers assume 0.5% growth a year. Now, we know for a fact that is absurd number. It's more like, 2%. But remember when they did the growth initiative, they asked for a 1% limit, and we were told that 1% is not going to be adequate. It's going to be far more than 1%. And so for this study to sit there and assume that 0.5% is going to incorporate, is going to consider all the issues, obviously it's not. So my point is, go ahead. If you want to spend some money, that's fine. But when the time comes, and we talk about development down in Rooney Valley and stuff like that, and we ask for, once again, what is going to be the impact, don't use this study as a justification for saying you've addressed that issue. This study does not address the issue of the impact of Rooney Valley or any other development. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. So, and I think we actually track at less than 1% for growth. I think it's 0.72 or 0.7. And the idea about the Rooney Valley is it could happen. It might not happen. What happens if we change zoning through the updates? There's a lot of unknowns in the Rooney Valley. There's also an ability for neighborhoods serving amenities to happen. And if those things ever would come to fruition, people wouldn't drive to the King Soopers on Alameda and Union. It just makes sense, right? So you're trying to anticipate something that may never happen, right? Depending upon the conditions or where development agreements go or the market. So to say that this is somehow flawed because different numbers were used to address the valley, I don't find that to be accurate. And I think that you do have to look at it holistically and see what that impact would be. But there's also a commercial component to parts of the valley that could realize commercial development that are going to save trips going one way. For instance, I would go the other way if there were more amenities down that way, and I think a lot of folks on my side of town would agree. So, next up, Mr. Hollander.
Thank you.
I just don't understand why people can't see the big picture. I mean, it's insane.
Purpose of us being here is to update City Council on what's been going on with the development dialogue. And as we reported before, we had 3 open houses, and we've now have completed 8 study sessions and have scheduled the public hearings. So now we're actually getting to the point where we're going to start presenting some ordinance recommendations for ordinance changes. This Wednesday is the public hearing on parking. Then April 4th, we decided to combine housing and mixed use because there was a lot of things that came up that were related when dealing with these issues. And similarly, April 18th, we'll be combining building and site design. So that's where we're heading on this, and that's all I have at this point.
Is there any other information from the Planning Commission or anything that the commissioners would like to add? So tell us about the process. Have people been showing up? You have an electronic format?
Well, not a whole lot of people have been showing up to our study sessions. There has been outreach online. We've gotten a lot of comments online, and we've taken a very diverse number of comments into account, and we've spent a lot of time discussing those at meetings. There were very few. I think that we were unanimous on our approach to it. Took quite a while to get a consensus in some of these things. We are a diverse group that comes at these problems from different angles, and so we look forward to the public hearings and hearing more from the public as to what we present.
And then based upon your public hearings,
Then it's
then you
gonna,
make the recommendation.
yeah, we'll make recommendations to city council, and then it's up to you to, make decisions as to actual ordinance changes. I encourage all of you to look at the minutes of our meetings, and if you have time, look at some of our study session videos. That there's a lot to consider in what we've proposed, and what may see. Some of the meetings I thought, well, this shouldn't be a long meeting. There's not a whole lot of controversy in this area, and 10 o'clock we're still there. It's complex, and if we rush to the conclusion without giving due thought, the future of the city's at stake. We just hope that you take our recommendations seriously when we proceed with the process. But ultimately, you're going to have to schedule your public hearings after ours and decide what to move forward with.
Yeah, certainly. And so for the community, there'll be 2 opportunities then, or at least 3 more, because if we have study sessions on your recommendations, but there'll be public hearings, and then there'll be the opportunity to have the public hearings here. And I would agree, we got here after a 3-year process, and we're going to try to wrap this up in less than a year. So, for some people it's not fast enough. For some folks it's too fast. Mr. Abel?
What will our process look like when they conclude a public hearing with the planning department? Will they then produce a vote on their recommendations on that item, and then we take it up and handle it as that item, and we can get the ball rolling as soon as they're taking some actions, making their recommendations?
That's a great question. I would anticipate that. I'm going to go look to our planning director.
Yes, we'll certainly, once we have recommendations from each of those public hearings, we can bring it directly. We can bring them as a bunch, but the plan would be we'll schedule them as soon as we have recommendations out of the public hearings.
Well, some of these things we've been talking about for nearly 2 years. I think we need to address them as soon as possible and put some solutions in place.
We can do that.
I imagine that will happen. Ms. Gutwein. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to encourage everyone in the community to come to the Planning Commission hearings and the public hearings, because I know it kind of can seem boring, and maybe people wonder, why should I participate in this? But this really is going to have a big impact on a lot of the issues that do impact our everyday lives. And so, my hope would be that everyone who cares about the outcome would go and would participate, so that by the time we get the recommendation, your feedback has already at least been heard and hopefully accounted for. So please go to the Planning Commission public hearings.
Yes. Dale?
Thank you. I wanted to add a couple comments to Mr. Hollander's comments, and that we have been working diligently on this. I know that some of these issues are a couple years old for you all, or several years old for us. They're a few months is what we've been, and so we've been working fast and hard to get through these things. And we. I agree there is not as much public comment as you'd like to hear. I mean, but we all kind of know that if people disagree, that's when they tend to want to come out and talk. But I appreciate Councilwoman Gutwein's comment, and plea to people to come and comment. The worst thing that we can hear, probably for you all too, is after the process is over, somebody says, well, how come we didn't know about this? Why didn't we have a chance to comment, that sort of thing. So we are anxious to have people comment.
Mr. Mayor, I believe Travis has somebody to introduce to add to the conversation we're having here.
Okay.
So we did invite a guest today. One of the discussions that we assumed would come up tonight, and that the Planning Commission had talked about at length, was the mixed-use employment district in the ME zone. So to the extent that you'd like to hear from him, we do have an outside expert that's prepared to talk. Todd Messenger is a planner and lawyer that is prepared to talk about that if you'd like to hear from him tonight.
Okay. So I guess certainly there's an education component to this, and okay, certainly. Yes, Mr. Reedy.
I'd like to add one more thing. So here, what we're doing at the end of the day, after these hearings, is the recommendations will be pushed forward to City Council. Then you decide if you want to implement or not, or make amendments. And when the code is changed, keep your expectations in with a reality check that all the problems we were complaining about in Lakewood, not enough open space, too many people moving in here, those problems won't just go away by us changing code.
Well said.
I mean, it's going to take time.
But the outcome is hopefully to have a much improved process to, I think Henry said it well, we have a good plan, but there's some holes in it, and hopefully we can fill those holes moving forward. Mr. Messenger? Good evening. I guess, would you like to introduce yourself and give us some background?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Todd Messenger. I'm an attorney and recovering urban planner. I work at Fairfield and Woods, 1801 California Street, Suite 2600 in Denver. I've spent 7 years of my career just writing zoning codes all around the country, and the other 11 years of my professional life as a land use attorney, either writing codes or helping development get done or negotiating transactions or whatever comes with that. I was asked simply to shed a little bit of light on the mixed-use employment district because we understand that had created some confusion and consternation among members of this body and the Planning Commission and the staff, and maybe some confusion in the community. So we took a very careful look at it and came to the conclusion that there are some intent statements that are in the zone for all mixed-use districts, and then for mixed-use employment more generally speaking. And then there's some actual regulations. And our legal view of that is that the intent statements are sort of non-binding. This is what we suggest that this district be used for. And then underneath of that, all of the, the quantitative figures and the design standards and the use tables and so forth actually regulate what happens in that zoning district. The upshot of that is that in the transit context, so mixed employment transit as opposed to mixed employment suburban, there are actual standards in here that require first floor retail and then anything else on any other part of the building. So a true mixed use requirement, if you will. In the suburban context, there is no standard like that. So what happens in that circumstance is that the use table then would control what uses are allowed. And if somebody comes in with a single use development that's permitted in the zone, then that development ought to be permitted under the zone because the intent statements aren't sufficient to control the development moving forward. To the extent your Planning Commission is coming up with recommendations to provide clarity on the point, that's how your code to me is sort of somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight and somebody who drafts codes for a living sees it. So we just wanted to provide that objective analysis for you.
So then let me ask you this. There's certainly confusion then that comes with that. And if it's a zone district that we're certainly looking to envision certain things, what is a recommendation that you would make to try to clean that language up to make it so it's more direct, more understandable for the community, for the neighbors, things like that?
Certainly. So for, I don't know from the planning perspective whether it serves or not serves the community's objectives. I think that there's a certain amount of disagreement among members of the community about what it should actually do. I do know that it could be used in furtherance of the objectives that are stated, but it also could be used in any number of ways that the market may direct. And so oftentimes we see mixed-use districts come in as we're now in an era of significant change in retail formats, significant need to reuse aging retail centers that are, sort of dying out and needing a new breath of life. We could do that in a number of different ways, and in some cases there simply aren't enough rooftops or not enough economic energy to support the retail component anymore. And in that case, you build rooftops in one area, and then you take another center and revitalize it based on that new economic energy in the community. Or at a transit stop where you have the opportunity for all the throughput of passengers, when you require retail there, there's a pretty good chance that somebody will take you up on that because there's a better economic opportunity. But throughout the region in the codes that I'm writing, and in particular, I'm working with one of your neighboring municipalities now, we're considering actually scrapping commercial districts as a straight district altogether, which is something Lakewood actually pretty much has done. Your only commercial district in your code now is a regional commercial district. All of your other commerce then would occur under some of these mixed-use zone formats. So you're actually kind of a leader in this regard. The difficulty is that when the regulations require a mix of uses, a lot of times you get actually nothing because the developer doesn't really want to do that or can't make that work for whatever reason. And so what you want to do with a mixed-use district, particularly in a suburban context, is create the opportunity to do a variety of different things that can be then absorbed into the framework of the community in a way that works. And that's actually your principal purpose of your district, is land use compatibility at the edges, economic opportunity in the middle.
So then how do we overcome that the developer doesn't want to, and move it along to say, well, this is really, more of what we want, and you need to do that? Then you set in certain parameters for that, like we have in the transit, where you just require it outright.
If you require it outright, you can, I guess, require it outright. The wisdom of that is another question. There are certainly also some examples from some sort of mid-90s, early 2000s of the land development codes that required a mix of uses in areas that couldn't absorb it very well. And a lot of times it's a real slow build for those mixed-use communities to actually get mixed use. A lot of the businesses come and go, and a lot of times that property stays vacant. And that's not really a good outcome for the person who wants to build that. Or the residential comes first, there's an attempt at commercial second. It may or may not be well positioned. Sometimes it doesn't get built. When it does get built, that's construction on the backside of a residential development, and people don't like construction. So, if retail's already there, it's an amenity. If it comes second, it's a casualty, right?
Sure. Okay. So there's some questions. Ms. Franks?
I wanted to get some insight into how you see that we could do a better job in the future of separating out that aspirational aspect from the kind of what the underlying code is. Before I joined council and this whole ordinance was coming up, specifically asked about the contiguous zone districts and was given information that led me to have one expectation. Then when I get on council, it's, oh, that's all aspirational. And so what I think we've done is we've set expectations in our community where they think they can expect something. Then later they're told it's aspirational, but they may have made a decision to buy or sell or other things. So how do you recommend going forward that we separate those things from one another so there isn't that confusion where people get confused about aspirational versus what's enforceable?
Certainly, and to be fair, a lot of people actually won't read the code, and most people that buy a home won't know what zoning districts it's located in. But to the extent that you made that inquiry, they're supposed to, and of course as a land use lawyer I always do, but that's a pretty, I also read all my title documents, which most people won't do. But to the extent that you have language in your code right now that's aspirational, it's also non-mandatory. So as a lawyer, I'm going to look for wills and shalls and not, mays and coulds and shoulds. And so when you look at the intent statements, there isn't a word in there that's mandatory. And you do have actually a provision of your code that says the following words are mandatory and the following words are non-mandatory. And none of the non-mandatory words that are in your aspirational statements are actually listed as non-mandatory either. but it does say for all other words, the dictionary definition controls. And so what you end up with in purpose statements is that aspirational language, if you will, that does not control then the application. That said, if you wanted to fix that, you could just have some introductory language at the beginning of your code that says the purpose statements in here are suggestions about how this should be used, but not binding regulations or basis for making a decision. You could certainly do that. I think if you take the purpose statements and make them into a basis for making a decision, you'll probably create a whole bunch of unintended consequences at this point. As you've done a full-scale legislative remapping, you may find that some of those mapped areas actually don't fit these circumstances, and yet the list of permitted uses that you have in your code and the standards you have for performance along the edges would be sufficient to integrate into the neighborhood and provide some useful market-driven development. And so I would be careful about making things mandatory, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to clarify what's not.
I really didn't think getting into the details was on some of these issues was that was the purpose of the meeting. But since we're discussing it, I do have a question. You're saying then having mixed use in every building in a mixed use zone is not something that would be desirable.
I guess what I'm saying is, from a legal perspective, it's not what your code currently requires.
Yeah, but
except in the transit context.
Yeah, but there, one of the considerations could be to change it to require it for each building. Right. What's your opinion on that?
I think from a market perspective, it's a bad idea. I mean, there isn't enough market support out there for vertically mixed use in the number of areas that you've mapped it in Lakewood. That would be my guess without having to look at the data. You know, you've got very few actual mixed use, vertically mixed use centers that are all vertically mixed use throughout regionally. And when you look at that, you know, those concentrate the energy and suck up that available market. And when you look at the proliferation of mixed use around it, that mixed use is going to grow from that central core. And then you're going to get other areas like Belmar, which is mixed use vertically and mixed use horizontally. And I think if you wanted to require every building to be mixed use vertically, you know, that's a certain type of development, a certain type of developer, a certain type of building code that's more expensive to deal with. And it's a lifestyle that you may not have, you know, the depth of market for in that area. So you want to be able to allow in a region with mixed use, fine grain of horizontally mixed use, vertically mixed use if it's appropriate. But, you know, in areas of a suburban planning context where you're typically dealing with a lot of cars and so forth, you know, your prior presentation was about transportation and pedestrian places and whatnot. Transit is a great place for that. Urban areas are a great place for that. But when we're catering to the car with front field parking at retail and whatever, you know, having vertically mixed use buildings in an auto-oriented shopping center is not a marketable idea in the region. And so we would not recommend that in the suburban context at the very minimum.
That's been my experience too. But if you have a mixed use, you know, I understand that each individual building should not be mixed use. It just doesn't work. Doesn't accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. But are you aware of any successful ordinances? You know, if you have an entire mixed use zone that is not mixed use, it really defeats the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. Do you know of any successful ordinances that require a mixed use you know, the entire zone to be mixed use?
I think those things work better in an urban context, and I've certainly seen in areas, in small areas, where you want to activate a street frontage with pedestrians and interest, where retails and restaurants and things like that are going to be on the first floor, and then whatever else on the second floor. I have seen that successfully deployed in those contexts.
I'm talking about well, one way you could do is through planned development, and you know, maybe that's the answer, but you know, there's a lot of problems with planned developments, as you know.
Yes.
What I'm talking about is having a requirement for an entire zone to be mixed use. Maybe the individual, like a Belmar, where not every building is mixed use, but the area is mixed use. One of the things we struggled with when we were discussing it is is how do we find a way to actually require it without requiring it for each individual building?
I think where I've seen better success in something like that is to incentivize it rather than require it. Because ultimately you're going to have people that want to build a certain thing in a certain location because they think that there's a market for that and people want that product in that place. I mean, that's what really drives development. Developers have their different specialties that they want to work in, and they find a piece of property that they think is going to be very successful for what they want to do. As the government, we take a certain amount of risk that they're going to be successful or not, and that's, you know, our code sort of directs it with the DNA. But ideally, you want your code to use the market to deliver the products that the community wants and needs in a design that's compatible with the fabric and the culture of the community. Most of my developer clients want to be compatible with the fabric and the culture of the community because that's going to make their product more marketable. So that works well. But when the ordinance is too prescriptive about the mix of uses, you're going to have some people that are out because they don't want to do that. That's not what they're used to. That's not what they know they can succeed at. And then you're going to have others that say, well, you know, the market's not going to be there for that product. Your code is rather static compared to the dynamics of the market, and so you may, on any given year, maybe get a hit or maybe not, but that will let the land lie, you know, underutilized at least for a period of time until something comes to fill that need. But it's usually better not to try to plan that out in advance, particularly when you're looking at, I mean, your commercial regional district is your only commercial district. Everything else has been remapped into one of these mixed-use districts. And so therefore you're saying we anticipate a huge area of land is going to be, you know, mixed use projects. Your market may not absorb that granularity, or it might, but you might want to leave that up on a site by site basis to figure that out. The good news is, I mean, we used to want to say we need to have a certain level of retail land inventory because we have to get sales tax. And now we can get sales tax from Amazon. That's helpful. Obviously, we need to create interesting retail places like Belmar so people will come from somewhere else and bring sales tax into the town that don't live here. But with that online sales tax coming to municipalities now, that's a very helpful way to say some of that inventory can go for places for people to live, which I understand, you know, the politics around growth and whatever, but supply and demand on housing is a pretty big deal for pricing housing for our children.
Okay. Mr. Abel and then Mr. Skilling, and then we can go back to the Planning Commission.
Thank you for your opinion. You spoke to intent. Our community wants and needs. Our community spent 3 years putting this thing together, and they spoke their intent. And from a long time observing court cases, appellate courts generally rely on the intent of the legislative body. So it would seem to me that to say intent is not a determinate factor would seem to be to ignore what a judge would look for in determining these things. You also talk about retail. Mixed use is not all about retail. Mixed use is about employment, vocational training, culinary businesses. Our community decided a few years back that they would like to, according to the definition, and this is a paraphrase, see a mix of uses on the same parcel or adjacent parcels as part of the larger project. That's what our community said they wanted. When we went into looking at this development dialogue, went in with the idea that we weren't going to overturn what that 3-year effort produced. We were going to enable it. I believe you said that your career is helping get development done. One of the reasons that builders are not putting in mixed uses is that if they can get into a mixed-use district with a single-use residential project, they can cram more units into the same space than they can if they follow our regulations for purely residential multifamily use. That would seem to me to be more than incentive. The incentive that we offer developers is to use our real estate to make a profit from. And that the rules under which that we ask them to operate are designed for the health and welfare of our citizens. And to avoid the open space requirements in mixed use is to not give folks the amount of fresh air they need, not give their pets the place to walk and do their business, and it goes against the grain of what the community said they want and need.
Councilman, as to the, if I may, as to the first issue with what an appellate court would do, it's my understanding that the state of the law is that the appellate court won't look to the legislative intent if the law on its face is entirely clear. And in this case, the law on its face with respect to the use table and the lack of any requirement for mixed use in your suburban context is entirely clear. And therefore, the intent statements would be left behind by an appellate court. If it were ambiguous, they would look to the legislative intent. And that's where we would have the issue. But your code is actually unambiguously allows a single use.
It is ambiguous on its face. So you and I will continue to disagree on that until somebody takes us to court. And you won't be suffering the problems that a court ruling might leave us with. Sure. So, and you referred to Belmar as mixed use. It is PD. Has been from the get-go.
And so, predates your
and right. And I don't think this forum was meant for us to debate these issues, but I think when an opinion is spoken and there are other opinions out there, they need to be addressed. So.
And I realize that this is a very passionate issue with passionately held views in the community. I come in as somebody who, yes, I do represent developers. Right now, about 60% of my work is representing municipalities and code writing projects. So I'm on both sides of that desk and I understand both sides. So just to give you a better background on who I am, I was asked to just come in here and tell you what I think this code actually says. What you want it to say may be different from what it does say, and in which case you should clarify it. Which is, I think part of the mission that the Planning Commission is on now.
The definitions are pretty clear. It's not what I want them to say.
I mean, as
in fact, I was never a fan of mixed use to start with, sure. But it is what our community wanted to see, and that's what I think we should give our community is a way to accomplish their own vision of their future.
Yes, Councilman, it's not for me to debate that.
Thank you.
Mr. Skilling.
Thank you, Mayor. And as much as I agree that I didn't think that we were going to be debating this issue tonight, you have raised some things that I think we need to discuss. First, you have mentioned that it's not ambiguous, and I appreciate your opinion from there. And as part of the study session, I think I'd like to get some clarity on your input on this. When I look at the zoning code, I happen to have the binder here, and I look at the use section and I look at the permitted uses. Now, I don't read anything that says that the table that under permitted uses that you can go ahead and just do those things as a use by right. I don't read that in the code here. What I read is under permitted use, it says that those are permitted as a use, and this is 17.4.1.2, that the permitted use in the specific zone district is subject to compliance with all other applicable standards of this zoning ordinance. Mm-hmm. You with me on that?
Yes.
Now I turn to the definitions, and you would agree with me that the definitions do have legal impact, correct?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Sorry for that cross. I didn't mean to that in a leading. I apologize. It's sometimes just out of my nature.
It is fine. And again, I'm not here to debate. I was here to...
I get it, but I want clarity on this point because this is something that, as you've identified, we have struggled with this. There are different opinions. So we've got the permitted, and then I turn back into the definitions section, and I look at what the mixed use says, and it's a single building containing more than one type of land use or a single development of more than one building and use, where the different types of land uses are in close proximity and planned as a unified complementary whole. So, if I read the definition of a mixed use, and I put that into a mixed use district, and I flip back and say, well, gee, what are the permitted uses? Well, I would incorporate that definition into the words, all applicable standards of the zoning ordinance. That's what I would do.
Okay.
Am I way off base with doing that?
I would hate to call a council member way off base, but
You can call me whatever you want. Is that off
Councilmember
base?
Skilling, I think what I would say to you is this. There is nothing in your code that uses the word mixed use in the context of an MES zone that requires mixed use in that definition. What it says is it promotes a mix of uses, which is non-mandatory language, and there's nothing within there, there's nothing within the code that I've read that says mixed use is a required outcome.
But wait, if
So it's
a
the name of the
mixed-
district,
if
but
it's a
that's
mi-
not legally operative.
Okay. If it's a mixed use zone,
Yep.
that means within that zone, we look to what? What do we look to for the definitions? We look and see what we can do there, right? We look at the permitted uses, the limited uses. We look to those things. We look in the table, right?
Yes, we do.
And each of those things are defined in the back of the code, right?
Yes, they are.
Among those definitions would be mixed use. So if we want to know what we do in a certain district, we look towards the definitions, including what mixed use means, right?
Again, you would have to find mixed use within the body of the code in a way that's legally operative. And while you may find that in other areas of the code, in the MES zone in particular, you won't. So I would challenge you to read the MES zone specific things and look for a place where it says mixed use is required. Because it doesn't. It does say mixed uses, or a mix of uses is promoted, but that's a very different, it's a far cry from saying it's required.
But what gives when you say that these certain things are aspirational, the definitions or even the title of the district apparently has no legal effect, why does the table have legal effect but the definitions don't?
The definitions absolutely have legal effect. So when you come across a defined phrase in the zoning code, you go back to the definition. What I'm saying is that the absence of the word mixed use within the operative requirements, the substantive requirements of the MES zoning district is what makes it a headache.
What is the so go back to that point. That's the key point. What is the operative, say that part again. What's the operative part in the MES?
So in the MES zone,
Yes.
there is nothing in terms of a substantive requirement that says that mixed use is required. The phrase mixed use is actually notably absent from the legal requirements of development in the MES zone.
It's in the title.
It's in the title, but you could call it Fred or Bob or George. That's just the title. It is not legally operative, the title of the zoning district.
But if we look to the uses that you can have,
Yes?
okay, we look to the table, right?
Sure.
Well, is that where we look? Where do we look in this binder? Because it sounds to me what you're saying is that we don't need all of this other language. We could just have the use table, and if it's on there, you can build it.
You could have a section that says at least 2 of the uses that are allowable in the use table are required on any given parcel.
But that's what we have in the definition of the mixed use.
Doesn't say that.
What do you mean? A single building containing more than one type of land use or a single development of more than one building and use.
I agree. Now, Councilman, I understand your headache about this. I do. I get it. It's a mixed-use district. Why the heck doesn't it require mixed use, right? Mixed use is a defined phrase. But I looked at it at length and couldn't find the phrase mixed use in the MES zoning requirements, only in the title.
What's the zoning requirement you keep referring to? Is that
So there's a design standards, the use table doesn't have a mixed use, because what you could do is you could have a line for mixed use in the use table and make that the only permitted use in a mixed use zone.
And by the way, let me stop you there. Do you mind how I'm talking to you right now? Because you're
No,
a
I don't
lawyer,
mind
I'm a
at all.
lawyer. You don't mind. Okay.
No, we're
Okay,
good.
So let's move on. So when we're talking about
Spirited debate.
You say the operative, when we look at what is that? That's what I'm trying to drill all the way down to. What do I look at when I say what's the operative thing I can do? Because I know it's not the little sheets that we give out, the little one-pagers.
Sure. So each zoning district, after the use table, after the use specific standards, let me try to find this here. I'm sorry, I have to flip through. There's dimensional and development standards. And within the dimensional and development standards, there are standards for mixed use.
What title are you in?
Hold on, let me get
Article
you a
5?
standard.
Okay, 512.
So let's see. So you've got mixed-use dimensional standards.
Mm-hmm.
5-15 is the page number I have.
Okay.
Table 17.5.2.
Right? I see.
After that, you've got minimum building story requirements, minimum building height by station area. And if you look at the transit related, there are requirements for specific mixed-use zone district context, 17.536. And there, you've got a mixed-use requirement in MCT, for example, where you've got this picture, I don't know if you, this picture of a building and it has a retail requirement.
Right.
For retail occupancy, and then designed for any other allowed use.
Got it.
That building is by definition mixed use.
Right.
The only place where that building is required is in a mixed-use district in a transit context. There's nothing else in your code that requires this in any other mixed-use district.
Yeah, but you were saying what I could look in this section and I could find what standards I use for mixed-use zones. It would be the legally operative language.
These are legally operative standards. These are the types of standards that I'm referring to. So then when we go back up to the zoning district, let's see, that would be way back. So when we establish the mixed-use zone and talk about its purposes, prior to the use table, in Article 3, I believe it is, right? So you've got your mixed-use zones are defined in 17.3.4. And it says mixed-use districts are established to provide a range of district types from the small neighborhood center to regional level centers while fostering high-quality building and site design and pedestrian, bicycle, transit, automobile circulation. The mixed-use zone districts are specifically intended to, and get this, because we don't use the word or the phrase mixed use. We say accommodate and promote a mix of uses, a mix of commercial, retail, service, office, and residential uses. So we're accommodating, which take it or leave it, and promoting, meaning we're maybe incentivizing it or allowing it, but not requiring it because we're promoting it. That's a very different word.
This is all the aspirational language you were talking about.
Right. Nothing about mixed use there. There's no use of the phrase mixed use. And then when we get down to ME, it's the same. The ME district is intended to provide for office and campus development with ancillary retail and residential uses along arterial and collector streets. Part 1. Part 2, the district may also act as a buffer between higher intensity mixed use districts and adjacent residential neighborhood. And then part sort of 2.5, maybe 1.5, I'm not really sure, but it's another aspirational statement unrelated. The district provides for medium to high density employment opportunities as well as educational institutional campuses. Now, obviously, when we look at the use table, it also provides for a bunch of other stuff like multifamily.
No, let me just stop you there. I get everything you're saying,
right?
But I take it that that's the part that you were saying isn't the legally operative words, right?
None of that is mandatory.
All I want to know is the part where is the legally operative language in here? Where is that? That's all I'm asking. Where is that?
Exactly. The use table, the design standards, the setbacks, the bulk requirements, none of which say mixed use and MES. So right now, if you wanted mixed use and MES, you could require that as a municipality. I've told you what I think. That's my opinion. I'm not a sitting member of this council. I can't even vote for it. It's up to you. But with respect to what this code says now, it doesn't say mixed use and MES. In fact, to the contrary, it says this district provides for medium to high density employment opportunities as well as educational and institutional campuses. So theoretically, you could just have an institutional campus like a hospital, and that would be it, single use. And that would be a P in your use table, right? Just like multifamily or just like whatever else is a P in your use table. It doesn't require mixed use. It in fact anticipates single use that's not residential.
Okay.
So it's your use table that operates on the use, and that's it.
Okay, so there we go. So the use table is all that operates. That's the only operative thing
Right.
on the use.
Dimensional standards, the height standards, the access, the design, the landscaping are all also substantive requirements, none of which either require mixed use in this zone.
Okay, and there are permitted uses within that use table, right?
Yes.
And that's what allows you to do the single use.
Yes.
Okay, why is it then if you can do the single use, why do we disregard the other definitions and the word and the actual definition of permitted use? How do you get from permitted to single use by right? How do you make that jump? Because that's the one we're all struggling with. How do you make that jump? Why wouldn't you go with the definitions? Why wouldn't you use that?
It's a fair point. And the reason that I use that is because I'm only going to look for a definition if the definition is in a legally operative piece of code. So when I look at the use table and I see multifamily, I'm obligated to go look up what multifamily means because that's what I'm looking at.
But if it's a mixed use zone, it says it's subject, a permitted use. It says it's subject to other applicable standards within this zoning ordinance.
The title.
What are the other applicable standards that could possibly be referring to?
All of the other standards in the zoning ordinance are landscaping, lighting, parking, setbacks, building height, building massing, all of that stuff that comes in here. And your zoning code is quite extensive on design.
Right. It's extensive on design and it's extensive on what it has extensive definition sections, correct?
It does. Councilmember Skilling, I understand your frustration that the phrase mixed use is being abused here. I understand. But the phrase mixed use in the title of the zoning district is, in my opinion, not legally operative. The zoning district could be called Fred or Barney. What matters is what are the standards and what are the uses that are allowable in that zoning district. When I look at your use table, there's not even a subscript that says this use in conjunction with one other use. There's nothing in your design standard that says the front 40 feet of the building in the suburban context needs to be retail, although that is in your transit context. So it was thought about when the code was developed. But as the code sits now, as a land use lawyer, I would come in and look at it and say, is there a requirement? I would have a red flag that says it's a mixed use zone. Is there a requirement for mixed use or is there an opportunity for a broad mix of uses, whatever I want to do? And when I look at the way this code is structured in the MES zone specifically, not in MET or any other T, but in the MES zone, my conclusion is I can do any single use or any multiple of any set of uses that I want that are permitted, limited, or conditional or special, in your code.
And my last point, and this has been fun, but my last point.
Likewise.
I think you can understand I'm well past titles, okay?
I understand.
I'm not worried about the titles of things. I just brought that up as kind of a point when we're talking about that there's nowhere in there that there's mixed use.
I think it's very important at that point, and I hate to interrupt the council member, but it's very important at that point to say mixed use in the zoning title is the only place where the phrase mixed use is used in MES. So that's why I went back to it.
Here's my last point. Here's what I don't understand. If you were coming in as the land use attorney looking at this, and you saw the definition, as I've read now several times, would you disregard that definition of mixed use?
I would do a keyword search for your code for all the definition, all the places where the phrase mixed use came up, and I would see if any of them applied to my project in the MES zone. And having done that, I would conclude no, they don't.
So the definition of mixed use that's in this code, you would disregard?
If it did not apply to my project, I wouldn't worry about it. And if my project were in an MES zone, there's no wording under any of the standards that apply in the MES zone where the phrase mixed use as defined in your code is actually used. As hard as that is to believe, it's true.
And so we have a point of order from Mr. Abel.
We do, and you can help us point out those things we need to change. But tonight's discussion was supposed to be about the process and the next steps. Where this came in, I don't know. But we're wandering off the agenda that we told the community we would stick to.
So we will thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the planning commission.
Let you two continue your conversation offline. But I think that
I'll referee.
Hopefully was helpful for both bodies. And I think for the community to understand some of the tricky things that we're up against here. So, Ms. Hodgson, did you have...
I was going to mention that really illustrates the concern that we've heard in the community and the importance of some kind of change in the code so that there isn't this frustration in our code. So that conversation just really illustrated that.
Mr. LeBeer.
I just wanted to thank you for coming out. That was very helpful for me, so thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'll open public input on that section. Nobody's signed up. Yes, ma'am. Come on down.
While we're waiting, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
That was entertaining.
Welcome.
Don't yell. It's just the way I talk.
My name is Cindy Pedrioli. I am a resident of Ward 5. I am also a land planner and development consultant that does a lot of private development. I've done residential master plan communities all the way down to small commercial. I have attended some, but not all of the commission study sessions, but I have read all the memos and I'm up to date on all of those. I just wanted to walk through a couple points I was seeing during those study sessions because we weren't able to make comments during the study sessions for that, so I was kind of keeping track. I'd like to encourage commission and council and staff to take into consideration specifically how any new standards and even some of the existing standards affect projects of different sizes. A lot of the standards specifically associated with mixed use and in transit areas are assuming that in some cases it would be a large redevelopment, a whole block or a whole 2 blocks of mixed use development with apartments on the top and retail on the bottom and office and all of this stuff. But there are some parcels within the mixed use transit zone that are very small. They're not very deep, they're not very wide. A lot of them are on busy streets with no alleys in the back. Specifically, I'm thinking of areas on Colfax and specifically on some parcels along Sheridan. There are very small parcels along Sheridan that are mixed use transit. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody kind of keeps that in mind. I do support clarifying the mixed use language that each project is not MU, but the zone is. And I'll just, from my experience, I work with developers that do one type of project. They very rarely do a mixed use, vertical mixed use. And a lot of the projects that we've looked at, a lot of the sites that we've looked at in Lakewood don't necessarily work for the type of use that they're looking at, whether it's commercial or whether it's residential. We're also not going to have a lot of infill development in Lakewood in the near future that is the size of Belmar, is the size of Solterra. We're not there. There isn't that much kind of stuff left. So we're looking at the smaller stuff, and so we kind of need to keep that in mind. During the building design conversation, there was a lot of conversations about what kind of architecture we wanted to see in the city, and I just wanted to make a note that we don't want to create enhancement requirements for the sake of having something to review and something. It actually creates a messy facade with no style, and I would specifically refer to some stuff that's happening in Centennial. They require a lot of specific types of things be added to an architectural building that don't necessarily make sense for an architect to put on there. Specifically, if the building is not that big, you can't cram a lot of stuff into one facade. There was some talk about design review committees. There's a fine balance on that, and I'd like, if that is going to be a topic of conversation, we kind of need to flesh that out if that's going to continue, because most design review committees are set up by developers in order to control the product that is going into their communities or into their project. So they have a financial reason for that. Sometimes jurisdictions do that, but it's very rare. There was also some discussion on appointments versus paid, unpaid, things like that. So there's some things that we kind of need to keep an eye on that. On site design, there was some conversations associated specifically with community public amenities. And they talked a lot there, again, in a lot of cases, kind of assuming that we would have a large scale Belmar that would allow like a public atrium or a public small plaza, those kinds of things. But we have to remember that, again, some of the smaller developments don't have necessarily that room on that site. A couple other things I just wanted to mention. I'm okay with the parking coming up as quickly as it is. One thing is that often the end user is determined to have a certain amount of parking, and often restaurants, if they can't meet a certain threshold, aren't going to go into that space. And so having a low parking requirement has actually been a hindrance for some people. And then one last thing I just wanted to say in the tiny home discussion, make sure that you define what tiny homes are. I had a community, I had somebody that we were looking at that, and in our own group, we were confused as to what tiny homes were. Some people thought they were literally permanent homes that are small size, but apparently there's also a movement of mobile home small size. So,
Thank you. Thanks for coming out and for lending that. Ms. Kentner, you wanted to speak?
Thank you. I'm Kathy Kentner, Ward 1 resident. As some of you had mentioned, I was not originally planning to speak tonight. I thought this was about the process. However, in light of the comments from the attorney who is here, and as a Planning Academy graduate, I would like to ask, where's the other side? Yes, it was some education. However, it was very contrary to the education we received in the Planning Academy. As a recent graduate, I can assure you that an attorney very clearly taught us that our comprehensive plan is our aspirational document, and all of Title 17 is our code, is the law. Because of this confusion, I do have a request that at your upcoming meeting to have a first reading ordinance, or possibly as an emergency, that we have all of these single-use projects in mixed-use zone districts come either stop until it's clarified or come before council. We already have many of these in the works, and it sounds like from what I heard tonight about the process, it's going to be at least another 6 months before a second reading ordinance on some of these zoning issues comes before you as a body. And before we have more of these projects, and there are, if you read the other standards in the code, the setbacks and open space standards, they are different for these single-use projects. I think Councilor Abel mentioned that. They're different for these single-use because it is not in the health, safety of our and welfare of our residents to put the single use of residential with the setback and lack of open space standards that exist in some of our mixed-use context. So for that reason, for the health, safety, and welfare of our residents, I ask that you please consider immediately at your next meeting having any single-use projects in mixed-use districts come before council, or simply have a moratorium on them until you've further clarified it. It would also be helpful, I think, for all of us to hear from perhaps the attorney who did present at the Planning Academy, who very clearly stated that our code is to be followed and the other aspirational. And I think those were all the oh, and the last thing was on the process. Please remember that this dialogue, both Planning Commission and Council, this dialogue has been happening for nearly 5 years now. We have a lot of residents who have come before Council just once or twice, beginning with 35 Van Gordon Street, letting you know that these are issues, and these are issues that we can deal with. We're not scared. We just have some unintended consequences in our new zoning ordinance, and we're happy to deal with them. Thank you.
Ms. Duffy?
Diane Duffy and I, too, found the conversation very interesting tonight, although unexpected. You know, the one thing I didn't hear was the answer to Commissioner Hollander's question was, did he know of another city that had code that really itemized it all out and was very clear? It would be interesting to know if he does know of another city that has something that you could take a look at, and we could maybe try and follow that so it would be more clear for our citizens. I think we all appreciate all the work that the Planning Commission has done. I know I really do. I, of course, attend the study sessions. You're not surprised, I'm sure. But there's no comment at their study sessions like there is at yours. So we haven't really had a chance to say anything. Now, one of the commissioners, and I thank you, Katie, did sit down with 2 of the neighborhoods to understand our issues and our concerns. And I know she's brought that back to the Planning Commission as they've been going through and doing all this work for you. So hopefully it's a little cleared out by the time you get it. But there are only 3 hearings that the Planning Commission will be having where there is comment. And actually, all the neighborhoods all along Colfax, from Sheridan all the way out to the Mills, we all got together and divided this up and tried to take a look at it so that we could give some comments. But there are only the 3, and I am going to take a vacation and I'm not going to be there for one. So you just need to be aware that not all the comments will have been ferreted out. So don't think that this is all going to come to you and it's all going to be done deal, because it's not. All the comments will not have been brought forward. So you're going to still get a lot of them, and that should not be a surprise. Please also keep in mind that there will be issues that have not been resolved at the Planning Commission level. And there may be things that the citizens will bring to you that the Planning Commission didn't address. So, thank you.
And keep in mind, you can participate online and send all your comments in. Honestly, so you need to do that. And you need to tell folks who aren't going to be there to do that so you can participate and you don't have to be there that night. So there's an actual website that you can comment on everything that they're hearing.
Good.
Okay? And we'll have, we'll publicize that tonight. Come on down, ma'am. Go ahead. Yeah, please. Come on down.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yeah, good evening. Welcome.
I am Jan Wallace, residing at 2135 Myrtlewood Lane, and I'm sorry it sounds stilted, but I had to write it out or I'd forget. With my husband, Jim Wallace, we bought our lovely house in Applewood a year ago last April. We moved here from Golden seeking a ranch house without stairs. So that's why we're here. We are very glad that City Council and Planning Commission are working to make it possible for Brewski's to develop a proper parking lot at 2100 Youngfield. We welcome Brewski's into our neighborhood. They're a fine restaurant and they add class to the commercial development on Youngfield. We are glad they are planning a proper parking lot with paving, lighting, landscaping, and drainage. We wish to share 3 areas of concern about implementation of this plan. First concern is traffic control, including pedestrian safety. Adding the parking lot will certainly help reduce street parking in front of our residences, but currently pedestrians are crossing Myrtlewood just a few feet from Youngfield. My husband and I, who are both seasoned and safe drivers, have come close to colliding with pedestrians making this crossing as we turn left off Youngfield. One proposal is to make Myrtlewood a cul-de-sac, guarded either by a gate or by unlocking pylons to allow emergency vehicles access. Then pedestrians could safely cross. An alternate proposal is to install a traffic signal light with a left turn arrow and a special timed signal for pedestrian crossing. While pedestrians are crossing, cars would not be allowed to turn into either Myrtlewood or into the parking lot. In addition, add a heavily marked crosswalk across Myrtlewood with flashing lights warning of pedestrians crossing. You've seen this in other places. They have these lights now. Second concern is lighting. We often enjoy sitting on our back patio, looking out west at the beautiful sunsets or watching the stars and meteor showers. We hope the parking lot that's just west of us will have the modern low height, downward-facing lights that will not shine over our fence. Third concern is drainage. We have serious concerns. After yesterday's light snowfall and today's gentle melting, we observed water draining from the existing Brewski's lot, where the actual restaurant is, onto Myrtlewood and pooling in front of Arano's house. That's the people right next door. Our residential property at 2135 Myrtlewood Lane is downhill from the temporary lot at 2100 Youngfield. The lot itself is downhill from that section of Youngfield. Youngfield and the connecting streets, including Myrtlewood, lack storm drains. In rain events, these streets become waterways. In addition, there's a 123-inch, that is 10 feet, 3 inches differential between the high point of our property and the low point. We are confident in these figures because we recently had our lot professionally surveyed by laser and drone. Therefore, we are also concerned about wastewater and debris from paving and construction draining down into our property. We hope to hear from the appropriate city personnel that our concerns will be adequately addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to Lakewood. And oh, sure, great. And does this? So Ms. Wallace, we'll make sure we get this to the appropriate department. All right, anybody else? All right. Ms. Hodson, did you have something to say? Were you raising? I thought, okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I promised you an early night. It's barely after 10.
Well, we got into some discussions I didn't think we were going to get into.
Forgive me, it's my fault.
I think, I mean, and we've recognized this. I think it's obvious. I mean, lawyers are disagreeing. That's when you change the code, and that's what we're doing. I think the bigger question is, what are we going to change it to? And, you know, if your intent is to stop development, then define the code as every building has to be mixed use. And, you know, if that's the case, then, you know, I hope you'd be upfront saying that. Having said that, I still think there's a problem with the mixed use zone as a whole. If we don't make it mixed use, it's not going to solve the problems that we're trying to solve in reducing traffic and all these other issues. So the time to talk about that is in the public hearing when these are brought up.
What is the website where public comments can be taken?
www.lakewoodspeaks.org.
I'm looking at Diane. Are you writing that down? Okay.
And
great.
There is a link on the front page of the city's website, and this has been up and running for several months now. The Planning Commission's used it. It tracks their views so the public can ensure that their comments are being read by the Planning Commission, and it also offers the public the chance to ask questions of either the staff or the applicants.
Oh wow. Okay. Well,
and I would point out if any one of us don't go to that site and read it, it shows up, and we'll be reported.
Well, and I want to just thank you all. I mean, you've really carried a heavy load, and you've tried to do a lot of things, and I think I can speak on behalf of this body. You know, you are our planning experts. Use your expertise, use your independence, and bring us the best thing that you can, and we'll make it better or or not. But we do appreciate that, and so I know the community's anxious, and we can start rolling into Mr. Abel's point. We're going to try to get these things scheduled right away. So,
Can we do that?
What's up?
Can we do that?
Do what?
Talk more about the process, about scheduling. Like, when are we coming back? What are we doing? I don't think we've talked about that yet.
So,
well, we presented our schedule of public hearings. I think it's up to you to schedule your public hearings based on this schedule. And I don't know how soon afterwards.
We need to have a discussion with you at some point on whether you want a series of study sessions to hear the results of these hearings, or if you want to go straight into hearings.
Okay.
Yeah, all the process after this is up to you.
We'll be done with them in a few weeks.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Gutwein?
I just wanted to say that when I was encouraging everyone to come to the Planning Commission, I was not in any way trying to to say not to come to council. I think it's a a good rule of thumb to do early and often. So as many times as we can get you. Thank you.
All right, we'll go with reports. Mr. Roybal?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick reminder, we're going to be having our Ward 3 meeting on Saturday, 9 a.m. at Phillips United Methodist Church. And Mayor, I'll let you talk about the DC.
Okay. Mr. Abel?
No report.
Ms. Harrison?
I just wanted to thank all those who came out to the beautiful junk sale at Jefferson County Fairgrounds this weekend. Friday was phenomenal. It was our best Friday ever. Saturday, because it was St. Patty's Day and we had a lot of things we were kind of working with, wasn't quite as shiny, but just wait, there'll be another one in October. Thank you.
Mr. Skilling?
A thank you to everyone that came out to our Ward 4 meeting. We had our usual outstanding attendance, and if you keep coming, I'll keep answering the tough questions and stay as long as it takes, like we did this last time. And then a reminder, we're doing prizes for the people that can sign up the most folks to our newsletter. So you didn't know about that. Prizes to be announced. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. LeBeer?
It's a good idea. I'm going to steal that. Just related to the planning dialogue, I know we talked about in some of our, recently in some of our meetings, we were discussing potentially looking at starting our meetings early or doing special meetings or a little bit longer or something like that. This might be a good time to sort of rehab that conversation because we got a lot of stuff to get through. So something to think about. But just want to mention, we just recently got back from Washington, D.C. I think it was a very productive trip. We were there for the National League of Cities. We met with our congressional delegation. We talked about many pressing issues facing Lakewood. We learned about affordable housing, state of the housing issues and affordability as it relates to, around the country. We also talked a little bit about homelessness, which obviously is a challenging topic that Lakewood is talking a lot about right now. And I think it's fair to say all the cities there were talking a lot about pushing Congress to act on infrastructure, not later, but now. I think that's a very important conversation. I was glad to be a part of that. So I think it's a very good trip. And I just want to give you guys some info on that. And so thanks.
Ms. Johnson?
No report.
Ms. Vincent?
No report.
Mr. Beta?
No report.
Ms. Franks? Ms. Gutwein?
Just quickly wanted to tell everyone about a really cool experience we had on Friday night. The Sustainable Neighborhoods program had a leadership retreat. And it was really exciting. A bunch of, all the different neighborhoods came, and it was a partnership with Denver. It was at the Alliance Center, really, really cool building. And it was fun to talk about and reflect back on all the great memories that we had. And then also to build those skills in the community to advance their project. So very exciting evening.
Great. A couple things. So next month or next week, the 26th, we originally had an executive session on active shooter training, and that has been changed. The executive session will pertain to the Denver Federal Center and HHS, but also we'll be recognizing U.S. hockey Olympic hockey goalie Nicole Hensley at City Council next Monday night. So could be a crowded house. I'm excited for that. We'll hear an update from the ACIC. We'll be appointing members to the Planning Commission, Board of Adjustment, Historic Preservation, Board of Appeals, approving a grant application for GOCO, adopting policies and procedures, Ms. Franks. And then first reading on Community Development Block Grant Action Plan, Parkland Dedication Fee, and second reading on energy efficiency. So it's a pretty packed night, and I hope folks that can get out or watch on TV, but it'll actually start out in a really, really cool way. So we had a small delegation that went to Washington, D.C., councilors Roybal, Beta, and LeBeer, and we did have a great opportunity to meet with Senator Bennett, and then Senator Gardner actually came down to Congressman Perlmutter's office, which I guess is a big deal when the senator comes down to the House offices, especially when you're in a different party. But what that says is there's great interest in what's going on in our community. And so we were able to sit down and have candid conversations and share your concerns about the proposed Colorado Coalition project about the McKinney-Vento Act and kind of, you know, where we are all on that. And they are willing to engage as much as they can and be there to support us in anything else that we move forward or have an opportunity to. And again, beyond that, we are continuing to do many different things, and I'm afraid not all of it is stuff that we can talk about because of things that are encompassed in that. That's why we'll be having an executive session. But it's really important for the community to know that we are very aware, we're very concerned, and we're working everything in every angle that we can. So with that, that's all I have, Ms. Hodson.
Just a quick, exciting announcement. Today, one of our own, a Lakewood High School senior, Camilla Emsbro, she won the Colorado Girls Basketball Gatorade Player of the Year. And that was announced today. She happens to be 6'5", and her GPA is 4.83, and she's going to Yale. And her identical twin she was sidelined this year with a knee injury, but she's going to Princeton. What? Oh, slackers. Yeah, they are slackers. No. So he just said that. So, congratulations to Camilla. That's amazing. She's the girls basketball player of the year. So congratulations.
Great. Mr. Hollander, anything on behalf of the commission?
Nothing further.
Okay. With that, we will adjourn at 10:15. I'd like to thank our police agent for keeping us safe, and we'll see you next week.